The Norse settlements in Greenland, established in the late 10th century, vanished completely by the 15th century. This disappearance remains a puzzle, and many factors likely contributed to it. One significant aspect was the changing climate. The Norse arrived during a relatively warm period known as the medieval warm period. This allowed them to farm and raise livestock. However, around the 13th century, the climate began to cool significantly, ushering in what is known as the Little Ice Age. The colder temperatures shortened growing seasons, making farming more difficult. It also meant that livestock needed to be kept indoors for longer periods, increasing the demand for hay, which became harder to produce. The Norse diet also played a role. Initially, their diet consisted of both agricultural products and food from the sea. Over time, as farming became more challenging, they relied more heavily on marine resources like seals and fish. However, their hunting technology might not have been as efficient as that of the Inuit, who arrived in Greenland around the same time. The Inuit were skilled hunters of marine mammals and were better adapted to the colder climate. Trade with Europe was crucial for the Norse. They exported goods like walrus ivory and hides in exchange for iron, timber, and other necessities. However, the European market for walrus ivory declined in the 14th century, partly due to the availability of elephant ivory from Africa. This economic downturn weakened the Norse settlements' connection to Europe and their ability to obtain essential goods. The Black Death, which devastated Europe in the mid-14th century, further isolated the Greenland Norse. While it's uncertain if the plague reached Greenland directly, it significantly reduced the population and trade networks in Norway, their primary link to the outside world. This disruption in trade would have made it even harder for the Norse to sustain their settlements. Some researchers also suggest that environmental degradation caused by Norse farming practices, such as overgrazing, might have contributed to their decline. Additionally, conflicts with the Inuit could have played a role, although the extent of these interactions is still debated. In essence, the disappearance of the Greenland Norse was likely due to a combination of factors. The cooling climate made their traditional farming practices unsustainable. The decline in trade with Europe weakened their economy. They may not have fully adapted their diet and hunting techniques to the changing environment as successfully as the Inuit. While no single factor explains their complete disappearance, the interplay of these challenges likely made it impossible for the Norse settlements to survive in the long term. Eric the Red, a Viking with a fiery spirit to match his name, is known for his initial settlement of Greenland around 985 AD. However, the long-term story of the Viking presence in this vast, icy land is not one of continuous success. Instead, the focus shifts to the eventual and complete disappearance of the Norse population centuries later, a puzzle that continues to intrigue historians and scientists. Born in Norway, Eric and his family later moved to Iceland. Known for his combative nature, Eric found himself exiled from Iceland for manslaughter. This banishment led him westward, across the sea, in search of new lands. It was during this time, around 982 AD, that he first encountered Greenland. Impressed by the fjord landscapes and surprisingly green valleys in some areas, he spent his exile exploring the land. Upon his return to Iceland in 985 AD, Eric cleverly named the territory Greenland to attract settlers, painting a picture of a fertile land ripe for habitation. His efforts were successful. In 985 AD, a fleet of 25 ships set sail from Iceland, carrying hundreds of men, women, and livestock, all eager to establish a new life in this promising land. However, the journey was perilous, and only 14 ships reached Greenland safely. The settlers established two main areas of settlement on the southwest coast. The eastern settlement, near present-day Qaqortoq, where Eric himself made his home at Brattahlid, and the western settlement, near modern-day Nuuk. For several centuries, the Norse communities in Greenland thrived. They built farms, churches, and maintained connections with Iceland and Norway. They engaged in agriculture, raised livestock, and hunted seals and walruses. Archaeological evidence reveals a society that adapted to its environment, even as it retained many aspects of its Norse culture. The population likely never exceeded a few thousand people, spread across the two main settlements and smaller farmsteads. However, by the 15th century, the Viking presence in Greenland had vanished entirely. When European ships returned to the island in the early 18th century, they found only ruins, no trace of the Norse inhabitants. This abandonment remains a significant historical mystery, and numerous theories attempt to explain it. One prominent line of inquiry focuses on climate change. The period of Norse settlement in Greenland coincided with a relatively warm period known as the medieval warm period. This milder climate allowed for agriculture and animal husbandry to a greater extent than would have been possible during colder times. However, around the 14th and 15th centuries, the climate shifted towards the Little Ice Age, a period of significant cooling in the North Atlantic region. This change would have made farming more difficult, shortened growing seasons, and increased the amount of sea ice, potentially disrupting travel and trade with Europe. Recent research suggests that drought, rather than just cold temperatures, may have played a critical role. Studies analyzing ancient climate data indicate that Greenland experienced increasingly warm and dry summers during the time of the Norse decline. This could have severely impacted hay production, the primary food source for their livestock, making it difficult to sustain their agricultural way of life. Another factor considered is the disruption of trade. The Greenland settlements relied on imports from Europe for essential goods like iron tools and timber, and they exported goods such as walrus ivory. Changes in European markets, such as a decline in demand for walrus ivory due to the availability of cheaper alternatives, or disruptions in shipping lanes due to increased sea ice or political events like the Black Death in Norway, could have severely weakened the Greenland economy. Interactions with the Inuit, who arrived in Greenland around the 13th century, are also examined. While early interactions appear to have been limited, some theories suggest that competition for resources or even hostile encounters could have contributed to the Norse decline, particularly in the smaller western settlement, which was abandoned earlier than the eastern settlement. Environmental degradation caused by Norse farming practices is another possibility. Overgrazing by sheep and goats could have led to soil erosion, reducing the amount of usable land. Deforestation, although Greenland had limited tree cover to begin with, could have further exacerbated these problems and limited their access to wood for construction and shipbuilding. Disease is also a potential factor. While there is no direct evidence of widespread epidemics in the Greenland settlements, the Black Death devastated Norway, Greenland's main trading partner, potentially isolating the colonies and weakening their support system. The exact combination of factors that led to the disappearance of the Greenland Vikings remains a subject of ongoing research and debate. It is likely that a complex interplay of climate change, economic pressures, environmental challenges, and possibly interactions with the Inuit contributed to the eventual abandonment of these once thriving Norse settlements. The story of Eric the Red's initial success in establishing a foothold in Greenland ultimately gives way to the perplexing question of why this Viking society, after centuries of resilience, ultimately vanished from the icy landscape. The disappearance of the Viking settlements in Greenland remains a puzzle for historians and archaeologists. For centuries, these Norse people lived and farmed in a challenging Arctic environment. Then, around the 15th century, the settlements vanished. One prominent theory suggests that a period of climate change, known as the Little Ice Age, played a significant role in their departure or demise. The Little Ice Age was a period of cooler temperatures that affected the Northern Hemisphere, starting around the early 14th century and lasting until the mid-19th century. This was not a full-blown ice age, but rather a time when average temperatures dropped and glaciers expanded in many parts of the world. For the Viking settlers in Greenland, this shift in climate would have presented considerable difficulties. Imagine the short growing seasons they already faced. With colder temperatures, these seasons would have become even shorter. This would directly impact their ability to grow crops, especially hay needed to feed their livestock through the long winters. Picture fields that once yielded enough fodder now producing less and less each year. The animals, crucial for milk, meat and wool, would have suffered from a lack of food, leading to starvation and a decrease in their numbers. Furthermore, the colder climate likely increased the amount of sea ice around Greenland. Think of the sea lanes that connected the settlements to Norway, their main trading partner. These routes would have become treacherous, if not entirely blocked, for longer periods. Ships carrying vital supplies and trade goods would have struggled to reach Greenland, leaving the communities isolated. The Vikings relied on trade for essential items like iron tools and weapons. If these supplies dwindled, their ability to maintain their way of life would have been severely compromised. Consider the impact on their diet. Initially, the Vikings farmed and raised livestock, a lifestyle they brought from Scandinavia. However, as the climate cooled and land became less productive, they likely had to rely more on hunting and fishing. Increased sea ice could have made these activities more dangerous and less predictable. Imagine trying to navigate icy waters in search of seals or whales, knowing that the conditions could change rapidly. Recent research has also highlighted another aspect of climate change during the Little Ice Age: rising sea levels in some areas around Greenland. This might seem counterintuitive, given the colder temperatures and expanding ice sheets. However, the added weight of ice on the land can cause the land to sink, and the gravitational pull of the ice can also draw water towards it, leading to localized sea level rise. Picture coastal farms and settlements gradually being flooded, losing valuable agricultural land and potentially damaging homes and infrastructure. It is important to understand that the disappearance of the Greenland Vikings was likely due to a combination of factors, not just climate change alone. Social, economic, and political issues could have also played a role. For example, changes in European markets might have reduced the demand for Greenlandic goods like walrus ivory, impacting their economy. Interactions with the Inuit people who also inhabited Greenland could have also influenced the situation. However, the theory that the Little Ice Age created significant environmental challenges, shorter growing seasons, increased sea ice hindering trade and travel, and potentially rising sea levels flooding coastal areas, provides a compelling explanation for why the Viking settlements in Greenland eventually failed. The changing climate would have made their traditional way of life increasingly difficult to sustain, forcing them to adapt, move, or ultimately face demise. The Viking settlements in Greenland, established around the 10th century, eventually vanished, leaving behind a historical puzzle. While various factors likely contributed to their disappearance, the potential disruption of trade routes played a significant role, exacerbating the challenges of starvation and isolation. Initially, the Greenland Vikings maintained connections with Europe through trade. They exported valuable goods such as walrus ivory, furs, and hides, receiving essential supplies like iron tools, timber, and grain in return. These trade links were crucial for the survival of the settlements, as Greenland's harsh environment offered limited resources. However, over time, several factors threatened these vital trade routes. The onset of the Little Ice Age around the 14th century brought colder temperatures and increased sea ice, making navigation more dangerous and unpredictable. Ships from Norway, the Vikings' primary trading partner, faced greater difficulty reaching Greenland, leading to less frequent voyages and reduced supplies. Simultaneously, changes in European markets diminished the demand for some of Greenland's key exports. For instance, the increased availability of elephant ivory from Africa reduced the value of walrus ivory, weakening the economic foundation of the Greenland settlements. As trade dwindled, the Vikings faced increasing isolation. The lack of regular contact with Europe meant they could no longer rely on external sources for essential goods. This isolation compounded the challenges of their already precarious existence in a harsh and unforgiving environment. Without consistent resupply, Greenland Vikings struggled with food security. Agriculture in Greenland was always challenging due to the short growing season and limited arable land. The colder climate of the Little Ice Age further reduced agricultural productivity, making it difficult to sustain the population. The lack of trade meant they could not import grain or other foodstuffs to supplement their local production. Starvation became a growing threat. Archaeological evidence suggests that the later Viking population in Greenland was shorter and showed signs of malnutrition compared to earlier settlers. The inability to secure adequate food supplies weakened the community and made them more vulnerable to other hardships. Furthermore, isolation likely impacted the social and cultural well-being of the settlements. The lack of contact with the outside world could have led to a decline in knowledge exchange and innovation. The Greenland Vikings may have become increasingly reliant on their traditional practices, potentially hindering their ability to adapt to the changing environment. Consider a scenario where a community heavily depends on regular shipments of food and tools from a distant land. If the sea route becomes too dangerous to traverse regularly, or if the distant land no longer needs what the community produces in exchange, the community will face severe hardship. They will struggle to feed themselves and maintain their tools, making survival increasingly difficult. This situation mirrors the challenges faced by the Greenland Vikings as their trade routes became unreliable. In conclusion, the potential disappearance of trade routes due to climate change and shifting economic demands significantly contributed to the eventual vanishing of the Viking settlements in Greenland. The resulting starvation and isolation weakened the communities, making them less resilient to the challenges of their environment, and ultimately contributing to their demise. The disappearance of the Norse settlements in Greenland during the 15th century remains a puzzle. While environmental shifts and economic struggles likely played a role, a theory suggests that conflict with the Inuit, the indigenous people of Greenland, could have also contributed to their demise. This Inuit Revenge theory posits that increasing hostility and violent encounters with the Inuit pushed the Norse out of Greenland. Around the 13th century, the Thule people, ancestors of the modern Inuit, migrated to Greenland from the west. This arrival meant that the Norse and the Inuit would have interacted. Initially, these interactions might have involved trade and perhaps even some level of peaceful coexistence. For example, archaeological evidence shows Norse artifacts in Inuit settlements and vice versa, suggesting some form of exchange occurred. However, as resources became scarcer, possibly due to a cooling climate or overgrazing by Norse livestock, competition between the two groups could have intensified. The Norse relied heavily on farming and livestock, a way of life that might have put a strain on the limited resources of Greenland. The Inuit, on the other hand, were skilled hunters of marine mammals, a resource that remained relatively stable. This difference in subsistence strategies could have led to friction. Consider a scenario where Norse farms struggled due to worsening weather, leading to food shortages. At the same time, the Inuit continued to successfully hunt seals and whales. The Norse, facing starvation, might have tried to encroach on Inuit hunting grounds or resources, leading to conflict. Furthermore, the Norse, with their European mindset, might not have adapted well to the Arctic environment or learned crucial survival skills from the Inuit. They continued to rely on familiar European farming practices instead of fully embracing Inuit hunting techniques. This lack of adaptation could have made them more vulnerable and less able to compete with the Inuit for resources. Imagine the Norse trying to hunt seals from heavy wooden boats, while the Inuit used agile kayaks made of seal skin, giving the Inuit a clear advantage. The sagas, Norse historical narratives, do mention encounters with the Skraelings, the Norse term for the indigenous people they met in Greenland and North America. While these accounts are often brief and sometimes hostile, they indicate that contact and potentially conflict did occur. One account from around 1350 even suggests that the Inuit had taken over the entire western settlement of the Norse. While direct archaeological evidence of large-scale battles is lacking, smaller skirmishes and raids could have taken a toll on the already struggling Norse communities. A series of such conflicts, combined with environmental pressures and economic decline, might have weakened the Norse to a point where they could no longer sustain their settlements. The Inuit, better adapted to the harsh conditions and potentially emboldened by successful encounters, might have eventually driven the remaining Norse away or eliminated them. Therefore, the Inuit revenge theory, while not the sole explanation, presents a plausible scenario where conflict with the indigenous population contributed significantly to the mysterious disappearance of the Greenland Vikings. The competition for dwindling resources the Norse failure to adapt, and historical accounts of hostile interactions all support the idea that the Inuit played a more active role in the Norse downfall than simply being passive neighbours. One compelling theory suggests the Greenland Vikings did not succumb to environmental hardship or conflict, but instead orchestrated a deliberate departure. This secret Viking evacuation posits a mass exodus to an unknown location, a vanishing act planned and executed by the Norse settlers themselves. Consider the archaeological record. While settlements show signs of abandonment, there is a notable lack of widespread evidence pointing to violent conflict or catastrophic events within the final stages of their occupation. We don't find large numbers of unburied bodies suggesting a sudden disaster. Instead, the abandonment appears gradual, almost as if the inhabitants systematically left. Imagine a scenario: the Viking leaders facing mounting pressures, perhaps economic decline due to a fall in the European demand for walrus ivory, or a realization that their way of life in Greenland was becoming unsustainable in the long term. Decide to seek a new land. They keep this plan secret to maintain order and prevent panic within the community. Over time, families and individuals, under the guise of hunting trips or other routine activities, quietly depart. They take with them valuable possessions, livestock, and essential tools, explaining the relative lack of such items in the abandoned settlements. Where did they go? This is the central mystery of this theory. Some speculate they sailed further west, perhaps joining or establishing other, smaller Norse settlements in North America, the existence of which is hinted at in the sagas and some archaeological findings. These voyages, however, would have been fraught with peril, and the lack of definitive archaeological evidence of large-scale Norse settlements beyond Greenland remains a significant challenge to this idea. Another possibility is a southward migration, perhaps blending into existing populations in Europe. The lack of a clear arrival point in Europe for a large group of Greenland Norse makes this less straightforward to prove. However, smaller groups or individuals returning over time and assimilating into their ancestral homelands could leave a less distinct archaeological signature. Consider the last written record from the Greenland settlements, a wedding in Volsey, church in 1408. This event suggests a degree of normalcy within at least one community. If a mass disappearance was imminent and driven by dire circumstances within Greenland itself, would such an event have taken place? Perhaps this wedding was among the last of the departures from that particular settlement, or maybe life continued, in some areas longer than others as the evacuation unfolded. The lack of detailed communication back to Iceland or Norway in the later years of the Greenland settlements could also support this theory. If the departure was a carefully guarded secret, those leaving would have little reason to announce their plans or their successful arrival elsewhere. The focus would be on establishing a new life without drawing attention to their origins or their destination. This theory requires us to consider the capabilities of the Viking ships and their navigational skills. While the open ocean voyages were dangerous, the Norse were experienced seafarers. They had already demonstrated their ability to cross the North Atlantic. A planned series of voyages to a predetermined, albeit unknown to us location, is within the realm of their technical abilities. However, the logistical challenges of transporting a significant population, along with livestock and supplies, across potentially vast distances should not be underestimated. Such an undertaking would have required considerable planning, resources, and a degree of secrecy that would be difficult to maintain entirely. The secret Viking evacuation theory offers an alternative to the more commonly accepted explanations for the disappearance of the Greenland Vikings. It suggests a proactive and deliberate departure rather than a passive succumbing to external pressures. While the destination remains elusive, this theory encourages us to consider the possibility of a planned exodus as a potential factor in the Vikings' Greenland saga. The disappearance of the Norse settlements in Greenland during the 14th and 15th centuries remains a puzzling chapter in history. For roughly 500 years, Viking society thrived in a challenging Arctic environment. They established farms, traded with Europe, and built a unique culture. However, by the early 15th century, the settlements were abandoned, leaving behind only ruins and unanswered questions. Many theories attempt to explain this abandonment. Some focus on environmental factors, such as the onset of the Little Ice Age, which brought colder temperatures and shorter growing seasons. This climatic shift likely made farming more difficult and could have impacted their traditional way of life. Others suggest economic reasons, pointing to a decline in the European demand for Greenlandic goods like walrus ivory. Increased competition from other sources might have reduced the profitability of trade, weakening the settlement's connection to Europe. Another prominent theory involves conflict with the Inuit, who migrated to Greenland around the same time. The Norse settlements were established. While archaeological evidence suggests periods of trade and interaction, competition for resources or outright hostility could have played a role in the Norse decline. Some scholars also propose that the Norse clung too tightly to their European traditions and failed to adapt sufficiently to the harsh Greenlandic environment or learn crucial survival skills from the Inuit. Amidst these established theories, a more speculative idea suggests that some of the Greenland Vikings did not perish or return to Europe, but instead moved further west to North America. This Viking theory of North American migration stems from several lines of thought, though concrete evidence remains elusive. The Norse sagas, written down centuries after the events they describe, recount the voyages of Leif Erikson and others to lands west of Greenland, which they called Helluland, Markland, and Vinland. While the exact locations of these places are debated, some interpretations link them to areas of North America, such as Newfoundland or Labrador. The archaeological discovery of L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, a Norse settlement dating to around 1000 AD, provides tangible proof of Viking presence in North America centuries before Columbus. Proponents of the North American migration theory speculate that as conditions in Greenland deteriorated, some Norse settlers, already familiar with the westward routes, might have sought better opportunities or escaped hardship by moving to these known lands. Perhaps small groups, or even larger segments of the population, decided to leave Greenland in search of more sustainable resources or a less challenging environment. One can imagine a scenario where, facing increasing cold and dwindling supplies, a group of Norse families prepares their longships for a westward journey. They load their vessels with essential tools, livestock, and whatever provisions they can spare. Guided by the knowledge passed down from earlier voyages to Vinland, they set sail, hoping to establish a new life in the lands their ancestors had discovered. Alternatively, consider a situation where conflict with the Inuit intensified. Facing mounting pressure and losses, a faction of the Norse community might have chosen to abandon their Greenland settlements and seek refuge in the west, where they had previously encountered land and resources. It is important to emphasize that this North American migration theory is largely speculative. While the sagas and the L'Anse aux Meadows site confirm early Norse exploration and settlement in North America, there is no direct archaeological or written evidence clearly linking the disappearance of the Greenland settlements to a large-scale migration to the continent. The archaeological record in North America does not currently show a significant influx of Norse artifacts or settlement patterns that would correspond to a mass exodus from Greenland in the 14th or 15th centuries. Nevertheless, the possibility of some level of westward movement cannot be entirely dismissed. Small groups of individuals or families might have integrated with indigenous populations, leaving little distinct archaeological trace. The lack of written records from this period further complicates the picture. The disappearance of the Greenland. Vikings likely resulted from a combination of the environmental, economic, and social pressures mentioned earlier. However, the allure of the unknown West and the established, albeit limited, Norse presence in North America leave a small window for the speculation that some of these hardy settlers sought a new beginning across the sea. While the dominant narrative focuses on decline and abandonment within Greenland, the Viking spirit of exploration and the known westward voyages keep the possibility of a North American chapter, however small, alive in the ongoing mystery of their fate. The traditional explanations for the disappearance of the Greenland Vikings often point to harsh climate, failed crops, or conflicts with the Inuit. These theories paint a picture of a struggle for survival against overwhelming odds. But what if the reason was far less dramatic, almost mundane? What if the Vikings of Greenland simply got bored and decided to leave? Think about it. For centuries they lived on the edge of the world. The initial excitement of exploration and settlement would have faded. The routines of daily life, tending livestock, fishing, and enduring long, dark winters, could become tiresome. Imagine the conversations around the longhouse fire. Another seal stew, again. The sheep are eating all the good grass. What else is new? Consider their entertainment options. No television, no internet, not even a decent game of chess if the walrus ivory ran low. The sagas, while exciting, would eventually be retold so many times they lost their spark. The long voyages back to Iceland or Norway were infrequent and dangerous. A young Viking might look out at the icy fjords and think, is this it? Is this all there is? Perhaps the younger generation felt this boredom most acutely. Archaeological evidence suggests that young women were underrepresented in the later graves in Greenland. This could indicate that the young, especially the women, were the first to leave. Maybe they yearned for more excitement, a different life, or even just a change of scenery. Imagine a group of young Vikings whispering by the shore, dreaming of warmer lands and livelier communities. Let's just go, one might say. What's keeping us here? This wouldn't have been a sudden, panicked flight. It would have been a gradual drift. One family packs their belongings and sails south, then another. Word might trickle back from those who left. Life is better in Iceland. They have more sheep, and the stories are new. This creates a slow but steady exodus, a Viking version of a midlife crisis on a societal scale. The lack of dramatic evidence, no signs of a major battle or widespread famine in the archaeological record, could support this theory. People don't usually leave a place because they are bored in a way that leaves behind mass graves. They simply pack up and go, taking what they can carry. Of course, this Viking boredom theory is a humorous oversimplification. The reality was likely a complex interplay of factors. Climate shifts did occur and resources probably became scarcer, but perhaps the underlying catalyst, the nudge that turned hardship into a departure, was a collective sigh of, we've had enough of this. Imagine the last Viking to leave Greenland. He stands on the shore, looks back at the empty settlements, and shrugs. Well, he might say to himself, adjusting his worn cloak, that was something. Time for a change. And with that, he pushes his small boat into the icy water, sailing off in search of a less monotonous horizon. On a Saturday evening, October 21st, 1978, a young Australian pilot named Frederick Valentich took off from Moorabbin Airport near Melbourne. He was flying a Cessna 182L, a single-engine light aircraft, registration VHDSJ. His planned route was a 125 nautical mile training flight across the Bass Strait to King Island. The weather was good, with clear visibility, and light winds reported in the Cape Otway area, a point Valentich expected to pass along his route. Valentich had about 150 hours of flying experience. He held a Class 4 instrument rating, which allowed him to fly at night, but only when the weather conditions allowed for visual flight. He was also studying part-time to become a commercial pilot, although his academic record in aviation subjects was not strong. At 7:06 p.m. local time, after taking off and establishing radio contact with Melbourne Flight Service, Valentich reported something unusual. He told the air traffic controller that an unidentified aircraft was following him at 4,500 feet. The controller informed him that there was no known air traffic in that area. Valentich then described seeing a large, unknown aircraft that appeared to have 4 bright landing lights. He said it passed about 1,000 feet above him and was moving at a high speed. A few moments later, he reported that the aircraft was approaching him from the east. He speculated that the other pilot might be intentionally toying with him. The young pilot continued to provide updates, each more puzzling than the last. He said the unknown object was long and moved at an incredible speed. He then reported that the object was orbiting above him. He also mentioned it had a green light and a shiny metallic exterior. One of Valentich's last transmissions was particularly striking. At 7:12 p.m., he reported, Melbourne, that strange craft is hovering on top of me again. It is hovering, and it's not an aircraft." This was followed by a 17-second burst of unidentifiable scraping or metallic sounds before all communication ceased. Despite an extensive air and sea search that covered a vast area of the Bass Strait, no trace of Valentich or his Cessna aircraft was ever found. The search lasted for 4 days and involved numerous aircraft and vessels. An oil slick was spotted in the area where Valentich made his last radio contact, but analysis later showed it was not aviation fuel. The lack of any wreckage fueled intense speculation about what might have happened. The Australian Department of Transport investigated the disappearance but could not determine the cause. Their official conclusion was that it was a presumed fatal incident. Over the years, many theories have emerged to explain Frederick Valentich's disappearance. Some people believe he encountered a UFO, and the strange aircraft he described was of extraterrestrial origin, perhaps even leading to his abduction or the destruction of his plane. This theory gained traction due to his unusual radio transmissions and the lack of any wreckage. Another theory suggests that Valentich may have become disoriented, possibly due to an illusion of a tilted horizon, which can happen to pilots, especially in low-light conditions over water. If he became spatially disoriented, he might have mistaken the reflection of his own aircraft's lights on the water for another object. This could have led him to lose control and crash into the sea. Some investigators have also considered the possibility that Valentich staged his own disappearance. They point to the fact that he had enough fuel for a much longer flight than planned, and that his stated reasons for flying to King Island were later found to be untrue. However, there is no concrete evidence to support this idea. 5 years after, Valentich vanished. An engine cowl flap was found washed ashore on Flinders Island. While this piece of debris was consistent with a Cessna 182, it could not be definitively linked to Valentich's aircraft due to the lack of identifying serial numbers. The disappearance of Frederick Valentich remains one of aviation's most enduring mysteries. The pilot's final perplexing words continue to intrigue and baffle researchers and the public alike. The lack of physical evidence and the unusual nature of his radio transmissions have ensured that the case remains open to speculation and debate. King Island is an island in Bass Strait, belonging to the Australian state of Tasmania. It is the largest of the 4 islands known as the New Year Group and the second largest island in Bass Strait after Flinders Island. King Island sits off the northwestern tip of Tasmania and is about halfway to the mainland state of Victoria. The island's coordinates are approximately 39°52', 21, 143°598 EE. In October 1978, Frederick Valentich, a 20-year-old pilot, intended to fly his Cessna 182L aircraft from Moorabbin Airport near Melbourne to King Island. He submitted a flight plan and took off in the evening. His flight was meant to be a full reporting flight, meaning he would check in with air traffic control at designated points for safety. Valentich's destination was King Island, which is about 125 nautical miles, 232 kilometers, from Moorabbin, across Bass Strait. The journey from Cape Otway, the last reported location before Valentich's disappearance, to the nearest point of land on King Island is approximately 48 miles. Flying at a speed of 120 miles per hour, this leg of the journey would take about 24 minutes, not considering wind effects. Valentich reported reaching his radio reporting point near Cape Otway around 7:00 p.m. local time. At 7:12 p.m. local time, Valentich made his final radio transmission, reporting a strange aircraft and experiencing engine trouble. After this, contact was lost and Valentich and his aircraft disappeared. King Island is known for its rugged coastline, interspersed with small towns. Curry is the largest town and administrative centre, located on the west coast. The island has a history of shipwrecks due to its location at the western entrance to Bass Strait. The tallest lighthouse in Australia, the Cape Wickham Lighthouse, built in 1861, is located at the northernmost point of the island. The island's economy is largely based on agriculture and tourism. King Island is known for its cheese, seafood, and beef. It also boasts world-class golf courses and is considered a good place for surfing. The population of King Island at the 2021 census was 1,717 people. Despite extensive searches following Valentich's disappearance, no trace of his aircraft was ever found in the vicinity of King Island or the Bass Strait. In 1983, 5 years after the incident, an engine cowl flap, possibly from Valentich's Cessna, was found washed ashore on Flinders Island, which is also located in Bass Strait, but northeast of King Island. The disappearance remains unexplained. The disappearance of Frederick Valentich in 1978 remains a perplexing aviation mystery. While numerous theories try to explain his vanishing act over the Bass Strait, a grounded explanation involves the misidentification of the planet Venus. This celestial body, under specific atmospheric conditions, can appear as a bright, moving light in the night sky, potentially fooling an inexperienced pilot. Valentich, a 20-year-old student pilot with approximately 150 hours of flying experience, reported to air traffic control that he was being followed by an unidentified aircraft. He described it as a large, illuminated object that passed above him and moved at high speed. His final chilling words were, "It's not an aircraft." These statements, combined with his known interest in UFOs, have fueled speculation about extraterrestrial involvement. However, the position and behavior of Venus on that particular night align with some aspects of Valentich's description. Venus is the brightest planet in our solar system and can appear exceptionally luminous, especially when it is at its brightest in the evening sky. Its apparent size varies depending on its position relative to Earth, but it can appear as a significant light source. Consider a scenario where Valentich, flying at night over water, observes a very bright Venus low on the horizon. Due to atmospheric refraction, a phenomenon that bends light as it passes through the Earth's atmosphere, Venus could appear to move or even shimmer. This effect is more pronounced near the horizon, where the light has to travel through more of the atmosphere. Furthermore, an inexperienced pilot, particularly one flying at night with limited visual references over the sea, could misjudge the distance and size of such a bright object. The lack of familiar landmarks and the disorienting effect of flying over a dark expanse of water could contribute to this misperception. Valentich might have believed Venus was much closer and larger than it actually was, interpreting its movements, caused by atmospheric effects, or his own aircraft's motion, as the Venus following him. The 4 bright landing lights Valentich reported could also be explained by the intense glare of Venus reflecting off the cockpit windows or appearing distorted due to atmospheric conditions. Bright celestial objects can sometimes appear to have halos or other optical effects. The fact that air traffic control reported no other aircraft in the vicinity supports the idea that Valentich was observing something else. While some might argue this strengthens the UFO theory, it equally supports the misidentification of a natural phenomenon like Venus. The final, garbled transmission with metallic, scraping sounds remains unexplained by the Venus misidentification theory alone. However, it's possible this was unrelated to the sighting itself, and could have been due to radio malfunction or other issues with Valentich's aircraft. While the theory that Valentich saw Venus does not account for every detail of his report, it offers a plausible, skeptical explanation, grounded in known astronomical phenomena and the potential for human misinterpretation, especially by someone with limited flying experience at night. The vastness of the night sky and the brilliance of celestial objects can sometimes play tricks on our perception. On a calm evening in October 1978, 20-year-old Frederick Valentich, a young pilot with about 150 hours of flying experience, took off from Moorabbin Airport in Australia. He was flying a Cessna 1982L on a training flight to King Island, a short, trip across the Bass Strait. Valentich radioed Melbourne Air Traffic Control, ATC, at 7:06 p.m., reporting that an unidentified aircraft was following him at 4,500 feet. The ATC told him there was no other known air traffic in his area. Valentich insisted that he saw a large aircraft with 4 bright lights. He said it passed about 1,000 feet above him at high speed. For the next few minutes, Valentich continued to describe the object. He said it was approaching him from the east and that the other pilot might be playing games with him. Valentich then reported that the aircraft was orbiting above him. He described it as having a shiny, metallic surface and a green light. A few minutes later, Valentich told ATC that his engine was running roughly. The ATC asked him again to identify the other aircraft. Valentich's reply was, "It's not an aircraft." This was followed by 17 seconds of silence. Then an unsettling sound described as metallic scraping noises cut through the radio transmission. After that, all contact with Valentich was lost. The strange nature of Valentich's last communication, combined with his sudden disappearance, sparked numerous theories. Some people believed he encountered a UFO. Valentich himself was known to be interested in UFOs. His description of a shiny metallic object with green lights fueled speculation about extraterrestrial involvement. Some UFO enthusiasts pointed to reported sightings of unusual lights in the sky that night. Others suggested more earthly explanations. One theory was that Valentich became disoriented. Flying over water at night can be tricky, and pilots can sometimes mistake the reflection of their own aircraft's lights for another object. If Valentich lost his sense of direction, he might have put his plane into a fatal spiral without realizing it. The rough idling of his engine could have been a result of this uncontrolled maneuver affecting the fuel flow. Another possibility was a mechanical failure. While the Cessna 182L was a reliable aircraft, no machine is perfect. A sudden engine problem or a structural issue could have led to a crash, especially if Valentich was already dealing with a confusing situation in the dark. Some even proposed that Valentich staged his own disappearance. Perhaps he landed somewhere secretly and started a new life. However, there was no solid evidence to support this idea. The extensive air and sea search that followed found no trace of Valentich or his aircraft. 5 years later, in 1983, a piece of an engine cowl flap washed ashore on Flinders Island. Investigators identified it as belonging to a Cessna 182, and the serial number was within the range of Valentich's aircraft. This suggested that his plane did crash. However, it didn't explain what Valentich saw, or the strange metallic sounds heard at the end of his transmission. The metallic scraping sound remains a key part of the mystery. What could have caused it? If Valentich's plane was simply experiencing engine trouble, or the pilot was disoriented, it's hard to explain this specific sound. It suggests some kind of physical interaction or damage to the aircraft. Could the sound have come from the unidentified aircraft Valentich reported? If it was indeed something unknown, the metallic scraping could have been the sound of it interacting with Valentich's Cessna. Or perhaps the sound was a result of a sudden and catastrophic mechanical failure of Valentich's plane, just as he was trying to describe what he was seeing. The disappearance of Frederick Valentich remains one of aviation's most baffling unsolved mysteries. The last audio transmission, ending with the unsettling metallic scraping sounds, only deepens the enigma of what happened that night over the Bass Strait. Despite years of speculation and investigation, the true cause of his disappearance and the source of those final chilling sounds remain unknown. The Valentich theory, centered on the idea of alien abduction, stands as one prominent, albeit highly speculative, explanation for the baffling disappearance of Frederick Valentich and his Cessna 182L aircraft in October 1978. Valentich, a 20-year-old pilot with around 150 hours of flying experience, was on a training flight from Moorabbin Airport near Melbourne to King Island over the Bass Strait in Australia. At approximately 7:06 p.m. local time, Valentich contacted Melbourne Air Traffic Control and and reported the presence of an unidentified aircraft flying about 1,000 feet above him. He described it as a large, shiny object with 4 bright lights. He also mentioned it was moving at high speed. As the encounter progressed, Valentich stated the object was orbiting above him and described it as having a long shape with a green light. His final unsettling transmission was, "It's not an aircraft." This was followed by strange metallic scraping sounds before all communication ceased. Given Valentich's fascination with unidentified flying objects, UFOs, and his expressed concern to his father about a potential attack by them, the alien abduction theory quickly gained traction among some researchers and the public. Proponents of this theory often point to Valentich's description of the object as unlike any known aircraft. The sudden silence and the preceding unusual noises in his last transmission are also cited as potential evidence of an extraterrestrial encounter. Furthermore, some individuals reported seeing unusual aerial phenomena in the vicinity of Valentich's flight path on the night he vanished. One witness claimed to have seen a green light moving erratically in the sky, while another reported observing an aircraft in a steep dive with a green light above it. These accounts, though unverified, are sometimes linked to Valentich's own report of a green light associated with the unidentified object. Adding to the mystery, a farmer near Cape Otway, along Valentich's intended route, claimed to have seen a large unusual aircraft hovering over his property the following morning. He stated that a smaller aircraft, resembling Valentich's Cessna and leaking oil, was attached to the larger object. While this account surfaced much later and the farmer's identity remains unconfirmed, it has been embraced by some as corroborative evidence for an encounter with an unconventional aircraft. Despite the allure of the alien abduction theory, official investigations and most mainstream explanations lean towards more conventional scenarios. The Australian Department of Transport, in its investigation, could not determine the cause of Valentich's disappearance, but deemed it presumed fatal. Some officials speculated that Valentich, possibly disoriented, might have seen reflections of his own aircraft lights on the water or lights from a nearby island, especially if he was flying upside down. Other theories suggest pilot error due to inexperience, spatial disorientation, or even a deliberate staging of his disappearance. Valentich had a less than stellar flight training record, having failed several commercial pilot license exams. Some propose he might have become confused by the horizon, leading to a fatal spiral into the sea. The lack of any radar tracking of Valentich's aircraft after a certain point also raises questions about his actual location and flight path. In 1983, 5 years after Valentich vanished, an engine cowl flap was found washed ashore on Flinders Island. This piece was identified as likely belonging to a Cessna 182, the same type of aircraft Valentich was flying. While this suggests the aircraft did crash, it offers no definitive explanation for the events leading up to the disappearance or the unidentified object Valentich reported. The alien abduction theory, while captivating, remains a fringe explanation in the absence of tangible evidence. It hinges largely on Valentich's own words and the few anecdotal reports of unusual lights in the sky. The lack of any recovered wreckage, besides the single-engine cowl flap, and the inconclusive nature of the official investigation leave the doctor open to various interpretations, with alien abduction being one of the more extraordinary possibilities. The disappearance of Frederick Valentich in 1978 remains a perplexing aviation mystery. While numerous theories try to explain his vanishing act over the Bass Strait, a grounded explanation involves the misidentification of the planet Venus. This celestial body, under specific atmospheric conditions, can appear as a bright, moving light in the night sky, potentially fooling an inexperienced pilot. Valentich, a 20-year-old student pilot with approximately 150 hours of flying experience, reported to air traffic control that he was being followed by an unidentified aircraft. He described it as a large, illuminated object that passed above him and moved at high speed. His final chilling words were, "It's not an aircraft." These statements, combined with his known interest in UFOs, have fueled speculation about extraterrestrial involvement. However, the position and behavior of Venus on that particular night align with some aspects of Valentich's description. Venus is the brightest planet in our solar system and can appear exceptionally luminous, especially when it is at its brightest in the evening sky. Its apparent size varies depending on its position relative to Earth, but it can appear as a significant light source. Consider a scenario where Valentich, flying at night over water, observes a very bright Venus low on the horizon. Due to atmospheric refraction, a phenomenon that bends light as it passes through the Earth's atmosphere, Venus could appear to move or even shimmer. This effect is more pronounced near the horizon, where the light has to travel through more of the atmosphere. Furthermore, an inexperienced pilot, particularly one flying at night with limited visual references over the sea, could misjudge the distance and size of such a bright object. The lack of familiar landmarks and the disorienting effect of flying over a dark expanse of water could contribute to this misperception. Valentich might have believed Venus was much closer and larger than it actually was, interpreting its movements, caused by atmospheric effects or his own aircraft's motion, as the Venus following him. The 4 bright landing lights Valentich reported could also be explained by the intense glare of Venus reflecting off the cockpit windows or appearing distorted due to atmospheric conditions. Bright celestial objects can sometimes appear to have halos or other optical effects. The fact that air traffic control reported no other aircraft in the vicinity supports the idea that Valentich was observing something else. While some might argue this strengthens the UFO theory, it equally supports the misidentification of a natural phenomenon like Venus. The final garbled transmission with metallic scraping sounds remains unexplained by the Venus misidentification theory alone. However, it's possible this was unrelated to the sighting itself and could have been due to radio malfunction or other issues with Valentich's aircraft. While the theory that Valentich saw Venus does not account for every detail of his report, it offers a plausible, skeptical explanation, grounded in known astronomical phenomena and the potential for human misinterpretation, especially by someone with limited flying experience at night. The vastness of the night sky and the brilliance of celestial objects can sometimes play tricks on our perception. On October 21, 1978, Frederick Valentich, a young pilot with about 150 hours of flying experience, disappeared while flying his Cessna 182L over the Bass Strait in Australia. During his flight, he radioed Melbourne Air Traffic Control, reporting that an unidentified aircraft was near him. One proposed explanation for Valentich's report involves a phenomenon where a pilot can become disoriented and mistake the reflection of their own aircraft's lights on the water for another object, especially when flying upside down. Imagine a scenario where Valentich's plane unexpectedly rolled inverted, meaning it was flying upside down. At night, over a dark body of water like the Bass Strait, the only significant lights visible might be those of his own aircraft. If the water's surface was calm, it could act like a mirror, reflecting the lights upwards. From Valentich's perspective in an inverted position, these reflections could appear as a separate set of lights below him. Because he would be upside down, his normal sense of direction would be reversed. He might perceive these reflected lights as an aircraft flying beneath him, possibly even maneuvering in unusual ways if he was inadvertently making control inputs while disoriented. Furthermore, if he was in a slow, uncoordinated roll or spiral descent without realizing it, the movement of the reflected lights on the water could appear erratic and seem like another aircraft playing some sort of game. As he reported, the 4 bright lights he initially described could have been his own landing lights, and possibly other aircraft lights strongly reflected on the water's surface. The idea that he saw his own lights reflected might also explain his later confusion about the object's shape and movement. As his aircraft moved or changed its orientation, the reflections on the water would also change, potentially creating the illusion of a large, long, or even seemingly stationary object above him as he orbited. This upside-down flight reflection theory suggests that Valentich's alarming reports were not due to an encounter with another aircraft, but rather a tragic case of spatial disorientation. This could have led him to misinterpret visual cues, ultimately resulting in a loss of control and a crash into the Bass Strait without him ever understanding what he was truly seeing. The lack of radar contact with his aircraft after a certain point could also be consistent with a low-altitude spiral descent into the water. On the evening of October 21st, 1978, Frederick Valentich, a 20-year-old pilot with approximately 150 hours of flying experience, disappeared while piloting a Cessna 182L aircraft over the Bass Strait in Australia. He was en route from Moorabbin Airport near Melbourne to King Island. The Australian government's investigation into this incident could not determine the definitive cause of his disappearance. Valentich's flight plan indicated a relatively short journey, with an estimated 41 minutes to Cape Otway and another 28 minutes to King Island. The weather conditions that evening were reported as calm with good visibility, seemingly ideal for a routine flight. Valentich had a Class 4 instrument rating, which permitted night flying under visual meteorological conditions, meaning he could fly at night as long as he could visually navigate using the horizon as a reference. During the flight, at approximately 7:06 p.m. local time, Valentich contacted Melbourne Flight Service via radio. He reported that an unidentified aircraft was following him at about 4,500 feet. Air traffic control informed him that there was no known air traffic in his vicinity. Valentich described the object as large and illuminated by 4 bright landing lights. When asked to identify the aircraft, Valentich replied with a now famous and enigmatic statement, "It's not an aircraft." This was followed by unidentified noise, described as metallic scraping sounds, before all radio contact was lost. Following the loss of communication, a comprehensive air and sea search commenced. Royal Australian Air Force, RAAF, aircraft, civilian, planes and maritime vessels scoured over 1,000 square miles of the Bass Strait. Despite the extensive efforts, no trace of Valentich or his aircraft was found in the immediate aftermath. The official search was called off on October 25, 1978. The Australian Department of Transport conducted an investigation into Valentich's disappearance. Their final report concluded that the cause of the disappearance could not be determined. However, the report stated that Valentich was presumed fatal. The investigators considered various possibilities, including mechanical failure of the aircraft and spatial disorientation experienced by the pilot. Spatial disorientation is a phenomenon that can affect pilots, particularly when flying over water at night or in conditions with limited visual cues. It occurs when a pilot's senses provide misleading information about the aircraft's attitude and motion. For example, a pilot might misinterpret the reflection of their own aircraft lights on the water as another object, leading to confusion about their orientation. Some aviation experts suggested that Valentich might have experienced spatial disorientation, causing him to lose control of the aircraft and crash into the sea. Another possibility explored by the investigation was a mechanical malfunction. While the Cessna 182L was considered a reliable aircraft, unforeseen mechanical issues can arise. An engine failure or a structural problem could have led to a catastrophic event, especially when combined with the challenges of flying over the Bass Strait. Interestingly, approximately 5 years after Valentich's disappearance, in 1983, an engine cowl flap, identified as belonging to a Cessna 182 aircraft, washed ashore on Flinders Island, which is located in the Bass Strait. The Bureau of Air Safety Investigation asked the Royal Australian Navy Research Laboratory to assess the likelihood of the cowl flap drifting to that location from the area where Valentich's plane disappeared. This discovery suggested that the aircraft did indeed crash. Despite the official findings, the unusual nature of Valentich's radio transmissions fueled numerous other theories. One prominent theory involved the possibility of an encounter with an unidentified flying object, UFO. Valentich's final words, "It's not an aircraft," coupled with the reported metallic scraping sounds, led many to speculate that he had encountered something extraterrestrial. However, the Department of Transport was skeptical of this explanation. Another theory proposed that Valentich might have deliberately staged his disappearance. However, investigations into his background did not reveal any evidence to support this idea. His family and friends reported his enthusiasm for his aviation career. Furthermore, the discovery of the aircraft part years later makes this theory less plausible. In 2013, a review of the radio transcripts and other data by an astronomer and a retired United States Air Force pilot suggested that Valentich, being a relatively inexperienced pilot, might have been deceived by a tilted horizon illusion. They proposed that he attempted to compensate for this perceived tilt, inadvertently putting his aircraft into a fatal downward spiral. Ultimately, the Australian government's investigation into the disappearance of Frederick Valentich remains inconclusive. While evidence suggests the aircraft crashed, the precise sequence of events leading to the crash and the true nature of Valentich's final radio transmissions remain a mystery. The case continues to intrigue and generate debate, highlighting the uncertainties that can surround aviation incidents, even with thorough investigation. In March 1975, the singer Jim Sullivan disappeared while on a road trip. He was driving his Volkswagen Beetle. The car was later found abandoned outside of Santa Rosa, New Mexico. Inside the vehicle, his 12-string guitar, wallet, clothes, and some copies of his second album were present. However, Jim was not there. His motel room was also untouched. Jim had left Los Angeles with the goal of reaching Nashville. About 15 hours into his drive, police stopped him for swerving on the highway near Santa Rosa. After a sobriety test, the police found he was sober. They advised him to get some rest at the local La Mesa motel. He checked in. Later, his car was seen at a ranch owned by the Giannetti family. The family confronted him about his presence there. The next day, his car was found abandoned 26 miles down the road from the motel. Jim's family organized search parties. Local newspapers reported on his disappearance. Despite these efforts, no trace of Jim was found. Around the same time, the local sheriff retired and the Giannetti family moved to Hawaii. Years before his disappearance, Jim had a conversation with his manager, Robert Buster Ginter. They talked about what someone would do if they wanted to disappear. Jim said he would walk into the desert and never return. The mystery of Jim's disappearance gained renewed attention when Matt Sullivan, no relation, who runs Light in the Attic Records, discovered Jim's 1969 album titled UFO. Matt was captivated by the music and tried to find out what happened to Jim. His search involved many phone calls, emails, letters, faxes, private investigators, and even attempts at telepathy and palm readings. He also met with Jim's wife, son, and producer, but he did not uncover any new information about Jim's fate. Adding to the mystery, Jim's album, UFO, contains lyrics that some people find eerie in light of his disappearance. Some songs mention long highways, leaving loved ones, and even being taken by aliens in the desert. This has led to various theories about what happened to Jim. Some people think Jim got lost in the desert. Others suspect foul play, possibly involving a local family with alleged mafia connections. A more unusual theory suggests that he was abducted by aliens, especially given the title of his album and his disappearance in New Mexico, a state known for UFO sightings. Jim's manager recalled his earlier statement about walking into the desert. Jim's wife, Barbara, also reportedly found some comfort in the idea of alien abduction as an explanation. His son, Chris, while acknowledging the unusual nature of his father's disappearance, has also considered the possibility of a fatal encounter with someone. The fact that Jim's car was found with his belongings, including his guitar, which he was very attached to, and unsold albums, but without any note, adds to the perplexing nature of the case. A decomposed body found later was initially thought to be Jim, but it was not. The disappearance of Jim Sullivan remains an unsolved mystery. His story and his music continue to intrigue people, leaving them to wonder what truly happened to the singer who vanished during a desert road trip. In 1969, singer-songwriter Jim Sullivan released his debut album titled UFO. This album, while not commercially successful at the time, has since gained a cult following, partly due to the eerie themes present in its lyrics and the mysterious disappearance of Sullivan himself 6 years later. The songs on UFO delve into supernatural and extraterrestrial concepts. subjects that deeply fascinated Sullivan. This thematic focus has led many to speculate about a possible connection between the album's content and Sullivan's unexplained vanishing. Several tracks on the album touch upon themes that could be interpreted as foreshadowing Sullivan's disappearance. The title track, UFO, speaks of celestial visitors and otherworldly encounters. Lyrics describe looking into the sun and waiting for a sign, creating an atmosphere of anticipation for something beyond the ordinary. Another song, Highways, expresses feelings of being lost and tired, with the narrator choosing to stop and create their own reality, a sentiment that some might link to Sullivan's decision to embark on a fateful road trip. The song, Whistle, Stop, introduces a supernatural element by describing a meeting with a lover from a past life who possesses telepathic abilities. This exploration of the paranormal within the album's narrative adds another layer to the mystery surrounding Sullivan's fate. The recurring motif of the unknown and the otherworldly in his music stands in stark contrast to the mundane reality of a musician struggling for recognition. Sullivan's biography adds another layer of intrigue to the UFO album. After releasing a second, equally unsuccessful album in 1972, he decided to leave his family in Los Angeles and drive to Nashville in March 1975, hoping to find better opportunities for his music career. However, he never reached his destination. His Volkswagen Beetle was later found abandoned in Santa Rosa, New Mexico, containing his identification, guitar, and a box of his unsold records. Sullivan himself was never seen again. The strange circumstances of his disappearance, coupled with the themes of his UFO album, have fueled various theories about his fate. While some speculate about more conventional explanations such as getting lost in the desert or falling victim to foul play, the title and lyrical content of his album have inevitably led to discussions about the possibility of alien abduction. This theory, though perhaps far-fetched, gains a certain credence when considering the eerie parallels between his music and his vanishing act. It is important to note that the alien abduction theory remains just one of many possibilities. There is no concrete evidence to support it, and more logical explanations likely exist. However, the power of art lies in its ability to resonate with real life in unexpected ways. In the case of Jim Sullivan and his UFO album, the themes he explored in his music have become inextricably linked to the enigma of his disappearance, creating a haunting and enduring mystery. The direct and plain language of his lyrics, while not explicitly detailing his future, created an atmosphere of the unusual that now eerily aligns with the unknown nature of his vanishing. The active voice in his storytelling on the album brings a sense of immediacy to these otherworldly themes, making the connection to his real-life disappearance all the more unsettling for those who discover his music after the fact. In March 1975, singer-songwriter Jim Sullivan embarked on a solo road trip from Los Angeles to Nashville. He intended to find greater success for his music in the country music capital. Sullivan drove his Volkswagen Beetle alone, leaving behind his wife and son with the promise of sending for them once he settled. This journey, however, became the setting for his mysterious disappearance. 2 days into his drive, on March 6, 1975, a highway patrol officer stopped Sullivan near Santa Rosa, New Mexico. The officer suspected him of driving under the influence. After passing a sobriety test, Sullivan checked into the La Mesa Motel in Santa Rosa. Later reports indicate he bought a bottle of vodka at a local store after checking in. The following day, a family named Janetti saw Sullivan at their remote ranch about 26 miles south of Santa Rosa near Puerto de Luna. The nature of this encounter remains unclear. The next day, authorities found Sullivan's Volkswagen abandoned near the ranch. Inside the car, they discovered his money, papers, clothing, his 12-string guitar, and a box of his unsold albums, including UFO and his self-titled second album. Notably absent was Jim Sullivan himself. Law enforcement and Sullivan's family launched extensive searches, but they found no trace of him. A decomposed body found some miles away initially sparked hope, but it was later determined not to be Sullivan. the lack of any concrete evidence fueled numerous theories about his fate. Some speculate that Sullivan, perhaps under the influence of alcohol, became disoriented and succumbed to the harsh desert environment. Others suggest foul play, possibly involving local individuals. Given the title of his first album, UFO, and some of its eerie lyrics about highways, leaving loved ones, and alien encounters in the desert, the more outlandish theory of alien abduction also gained traction. Sullivan's wife reportedly found some comfort in this idea. Adding to the mystery, Sullivan's manager recalled a conversation months before his disappearance. When asked how he would disappear, Sullivan reportedly said he would walk into the desert and never return. This statement eerily mirrors the circumstances of his last known sighting, walking away from his abandoned car. The solo road trip, meant to be a hopeful journey toward musical recognition, instead became the backdrop for one of music's most enduring and unsettling disappearances. The vast, lonely landscape of New Mexico, the abandoned car filled with his belongings, and the lack of any definitive answers continue to fuel speculation about what truly happened to Jim Sullivan on that fateful drive. The intact Volkswagen Beetle sat abandoned. This discovery made the mystery of Sullivan's disappearance even bigger. The car was whole. Nothing seemed out of place. It was not wrecked or stripped. This suggested Sullivan did not leave in a hurry or face a violent encounter in or near his vehicle. The presence of the car, untouched, raised more questions than it answered. Think about it, like finding a lost bicycle perfectly leaned against a tree. You would wonder why the owner simply left it there. If the bicycle was damaged or missing parts, it might suggest an accident or theft. But a pristine bicycle suggests the owner walked away for some unknown reason. Sullivan's car was like that pristine bicycle. Its good condition implied he did not vanish due to a car problem or a struggle at that location. The fact that the car was intact is important. It means all its parts were there. The tires were inflated, the windows were not broken, and the body was not damaged. If the car had been found with a flat tire and the door open, it might suggest Sullivan had a problem and then left to find help. If the windows were smashed, it could point to a confrontation. But the intact nature of the car ruled out these simpler explanations. This detail amplified the mystery. Amplify means to make something bigger or more intense. The discovery of the car did not solve the mystery. Instead, it made it more puzzling. Investigators likely asked themselves, if his car was here and working, how did Sullivan leave? Where did he go? Why didn't he take his car? Consider a scenario. Imagine someone named Alex goes missing. Their car is found parked neatly in their driveway. The doors are locked and the keys are nowhere to be found. This intact car makes Alex's disappearance more mysterious. It suggests Alex did not drive away. It makes you wonder if they left on foot, were picked up by someone else, or if something else entirely happened. The Volkswagen Beetle being intact was a significant piece of evidence. It shaped the direction of the investigation. It likely led investigators to focus on possibilities other than a car accident or foul play involving the vehicle. They might have started looking more closely at Sullivan's personal life, his relationships, and any reasons he might have had to leave without his car. The discovery of the intact car also likely baffled Sullivan's family and friends. Seeing his car seemingly untouched would have added to their confusion and worry. It would have eliminated some potential explanations for his disappearance while highlighting the strangeness of the situation. For example, if Sullivan was known to be meticulous about his car, finding it perfectly parked would be even more unusual if he had simply decided to leave. It would suggest a sudden or unplanned departure. The car's specific location would also be important. Was it parked on a public street, in a parking lot, or somewhere more isolated? An intact car found in a remote location would add a different layer of mystery compared to one found in a busy area. The make and model of the car, a Volkswagen Beetle, might also hold some significance depending on Sullivan's personality and habits. Was this his prized possession? Was it a car he relied on daily? If so, leaving it behind in perfect condition would be even more out of character and therefore more mysterious. In short, The intact Volkswagen Beetle served as a stark and silent clue. It told investigators what didn't happen, making the question of what did happen to Sullivan all the more perplexing and urgent. The absence of any signs of trouble with the car focused the search for answers elsewhere, deepening the enigma surrounding his disappearance. It was a detail that investigators could not ignore, a piece of the puzzle that both informed and complicated their understanding of the case. The car was a tangible link to Sullivan's last known whereabouts, but its undisturbed state only served to underscore the unsettling nature of his absence. Exposure, in the context of someone disappearing in the desert, refers to the harmful effects on the body caused by the harsh desert environment. This includes extreme temperatures, lack of water, and intense sunlight. It is plausible that exposure could be a cause for someone's disappearance if they became incapacitated and were unable to seek help or shelter. The desert presents two main temperature-related dangers: hypothermia, overheating, and, surprisingly, hypothermia, cooling. Hypothermia can occur rapidly in the desert sun. The body's core temperature rises to dangerous levels if it cannot lose heat effectively through sweating. Early signs of hypothermia include heavy sweating, dizziness, nausea, headache, and muscle cramps. As it worsens, confusion, a rapid heartbeat, and even loss of consciousness can occur. If a person experiencing hypothermia is alone and unable to cool down or find shade, they could become disoriented and eventually collapse. Paradoxically, hypothermia is also a risk in the desert, especially at night when temperatures can drop significantly. Hypothermia occurs when the body loses heat faster than it can produce it, leading to a dangerously low core temperature. Mild hypothermia may present with shivering, confusion, and poor coordination. As it progresses, shivering may stop, and the person can become increasingly confused, drowsy, and eventually lose consciousness. Someone experiencing hypothermia may also make the dangerous decision to remove clothing known as paradoxical undressing, as they feel a sensation of heat even though their body temperature is dropping. If a person lost in the desert is not prepared for the drop in nighttime temperatures, hypothermia could incapacitate them. Dehydration is another critical aspect of exposure in the desert. Humans need water to regulate body temperature and maintain bodily functions. In the dry desert air, sweat evaporates quickly, leading to rapid fluid loss. Without sufficient water intake, dehydration can lead to fatigue, dizziness, confusion, and eventually organ failure. A dehydrated person's cognitive function can decline, making it difficult to make sound decisions about navigation or seeking help. Intense sunlight also contributes to the dangers of desert exposure. Prolonged exposure to ultraviolet, UV radiation, can cause severe sunburn, which impairs the skin's ability to regulate temperature. Sunburn can also lead to dehydration as the body tries to heal the damaged skin. Furthermore, the glare from the sun can cause temporary or even permanent vision problems, making it difficult for someone to navigate or signal for help. Consider a scenario. Sullivan is walking in the desert during the day without adequate water or sun protection. The intense heat and sun cause him to become severely dehydrated, and his body temperature rises. He starts feeling dizzy and confused. Disoriented, he wanders further from his intended path. As evening approaches, the temperature drops drastically. Without shelter or warm clothing, his body begins to lose heat rapidly, leading to hypothermia. The combined effects of dehydration, hypothermia during the day, and hypothermia at night could leave him incapacitated and unable to seek help, potentially leading to his disappearance. Another scenario could involve Sullivan becoming injured, perhaps from a fall, and being unable to move or seek shelter. Exposed to the elements, he could succumb to the effects of extreme temperatures, dehydration, or hypothermia, depending on the time of day and weather conditions. Therefore, exposure to the harsh desert environment, encompassing extreme temperatures, dehydration, and intense sunlight presents a plausible explanation for someone's disappearance if they become unable to protect themselves from these elements. The Sullivan theory, which suggests alien abduction as the cause of Jim Sullivan's disappearance, gains traction due to his 1969 album titled UFO. The lyrics of this album contain themes that some listeners find eerily prescient of his vanishing. In 1975. While Sullivan's music career did not achieve mainstream success during his lifetime, the mystery surrounding his fate has amplified interest in his work, particularly this specific album. Sullivan was a musician who played in a Malibu bar. He garnered enough attention that some individuals invested in his talent, leading to the recording of UFO, with session musicians known as the Wrecking Crew. Despite these efforts, the album did not achieve commercial success upon its initial release. In March 1975, Sullivan left Los Angeles, intending to reach Nashville to further his music career. He left behind his wife and son. However, he never arrived in Nashville. His car was found abandoned in the New Mexico desert, approximately 26 miles from a motel where he had checked in. Sullivan himself was never seen or heard from again. The strange circumstances of his disappearance, coupled with the lyrical content of his album UFO, have fueled various theories about what might have happened to him. Some of the lyrics on the album touch upon themes of long journeys, leaving loved ones, and even encounters with extraterrestrial beings in the desert. For example, the title track UFO and other songs contain imagery that some interpret as foreshadowing his own mysterious vanishing in a desert landscape. Consider the lyrics that speak of a highways stretching out endlessly, or the feeling of being an outsider. These could be seen as metaphors for his journey and his lack of success in the music industry. However, when viewed through the lens of his disappearance in the desert, these lyrics take on a more literal and unsettling tone for some. The most direct link to the alien abduction theory comes from the title of the album itself and any lyrical references that could be interpreted as otherworldly encounters. While the album is generally classified as folk rock, the inclusion of UFO as the title and any suggestive lyrics within the songs have led some to speculate that Sullivan may have believed in or been interested in the possibility of extraterrestrial life and abduction. For instance, if a song on the album described a strange light in the sky or a feeling of being watched by unseen entities, listeners might connect these lyrical themes to the idea of alien abduction, especially in the context of his unexplained disappearance in a remote location. The desert, with its wide open spaces and reported sightings of unusual phenomena, further adds to this speculative narrative. It is important to note that the alien abduction theory is just one of several possibilities surrounding Sullivan's disappearance. Other theories range from him getting lost in the desert to foul play involving unknown individuals. However, the unique element that sustains the alien abduction theory is the existence of his album UFO, released 6 years before he vanished in the desert. This coincidence of the album's themes and his actual disappearance provides a compelling, albeit speculative, link for those who subscribe to this particular theory. The cryptic nature of his last phone call to his wife, where he reportedly said, "You wouldn't believe if I told you," also adds fuel to the more unusual theories. The lack of any concrete evidence to explain his disappearance allows for such theories to persist. In the absence of facts, people often turn to the unusual or the thematic connections they find in the available information, such as the lyrics of an album titled UFO by an artist who then vanished without a trace. Jim Sullivan's 1969 album, UFO, takes on a haunting quality when viewed through the lens of his later disappearance. The lyrics, at times cryptic and imbued with a sense of foreboding, can be interpreted as a musical cry for help, hinting at a troubled state of mind or even premonitions of his vanishing. Consider the track, Highways. The open road can symbolize freedom and escape, but also loneliness and the unknown. Lines about leaving loved ones behind and the vast emptiness of the landscape could reflect a desire to break away from his current life, perhaps fueled by professional frustrations. Sullivan, despite some success performing in Malibu, never achieved mainstream recognition. This lack of a breakthrough might have created a deep sense of disillusionment. The title track, UFO, with its overt references to unidentified flying objects, adds another layer of intrigue. While Sullivan had an interest in the supernatural, the song's eerie atmosphere and themes of otherworldly encounters could be a metaphorical representation of feeling lost, alienated, or even a sense of impending doom. It's as if he felt something inexplicable was coming, something that would take him away. Even seemingly less ominous songs can be re-examined. Plain, as your eyes can see, might speak to a desire for clarity, or a yearning for someone to truly understand his inner turmoil. The simplicity of the title contrasts with the complex emotions that might lie beneath the surface. The song Sandman introduces a figure who brings dreams, but dreams can also be a form of escape from a harsh reality. In the context of his disappearance, this could be seen as a wish for oblivion or a peaceful departure from his struggles. It is important to acknowledge that interpreting art after the artist's disappearance is inherently speculative. We project our knowledge of the events onto the work. However, the recurring themes of departure, the unknown, and a certain melancholy that permeates UFO cannot be entirely dismissed. The album, initially overlooked, gained a cult following precisely because its sonic landscape and lyrical content eerily mirror the mystery surrounding Sullivan's fate. Some theories surrounding his disappearance in 1975 include Getting Lost, In the Desert, Foul Play, or, given the album's title, even alien abduction. While the latter is highly improbable, it underscores the strange connection between his art and his life's unresolved mystery. The album UFO remains not just a collection of songs, but a haunting artifact that invites listeners to ponder the inner world of an artist who seemingly vanished into thin air, leaving behind a musical enigma. In March 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, a large Boeing 777 commercial airplane, disappeared while flying from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. On board were 227 passengers and 12 crew members. The aircraft took off normally and reached its cruising altitude. Air traffic control maintained contact with the pilots. However, shortly after entering Vietnamese airspace, the plane's transponder, a device that communicates its location and altitude, stopped working. This made it disappear from civilian radar screens. Military radar continued to track the aircraft as it sharply deviated from its planned flight path. Instead of heading northeast towards Beijing, it turned west, crossing the Malay Peninsula. Military radar lost contact with the plane over the Andaman Sea. These unexpected turns and the occlusion of communication systems immediately raised concerns. After the plane disappeared from radar, an extensive search operation began. Initially, the search focused on the South China Sea and the Strait of Malacca. However, analysis of faint signals exchanged between the aircraft and a satellite belonging to Inmarsat, a British telecommunications company, indicated that the plane had continued flying for several more hours. This analysis suggested two possible flight paths: a northern arc stretching across Asia and a southern arc into the remote southern Indian Ocean. Based on the satellite data, the search shifted to the vast and deep southern Indian Ocean, thousands of kilometers southwest of Australia. This area is known for its harsh weather conditions and extreme remoteness, making the search incredibly challenging. Numerous ships and aircraft from several countries participated in the effort, scanning the ocean surface for any sign of the missing plane. Underwater searches using sophisticated sonar equipment were also conducted over large areas of the seabed. Despite these extensive efforts, the main wreckage of MH370 has never been found. However, several pieces of debris, confirmed or highly likely to be from the missing Boeing 777, washed ashore on the coasts of various islands and countries in the Western Indian Ocean, including Réunion, Mozambique, South Africa, and Tanzania. These pieces included a flaperon, a part of the wing, and other cabin interior components. The discovery of this debris confirmed that the plane did indeed crash in the Indian Ocean. The analysis of the recovered debris provided some clues, but did not fully explain what happened to the aircraft. For example, The flaperon showed evidence of being extended during impact, suggesting a possible controlled ditching or a very low-speed crash. However, the condition of other recovered parts did not definitively confirm this. The lack of a clear explanation for the disappearance has led to numerous theories, ranging from mechanical failure and pilot suicide to hijacking and even more. Speculative scenarios. Official investigations have explored various possibilities, but without the main wreckage and the flight recorders, the black boxes, determining the exact sequence of events remains incredibly difficult. The Malaysian government, along with international teams, conducted multiple investigations into the disappearance. The final official report released in 2018 stated that the change in the flight path likely resulted from manual inputs, meaning someone deliberately steered the plane off course. However, the report could not determine who was responsible or the reason behind it. It deemed mechanical malfunction unlikely. The disappearance of MH370 remains one of the biggest mysteries in aviation history. The lack of a definitive explanation has caused immense grief and frustration for the families of those on board. Despite years of searching and numerous theories, the fate of the aircraft and the people on it is still unknown. The ongoing mystery continues to fuel speculation and keeps the hope alive for some that one day the truth will finally be revealed. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, or MH370 as it is commonly known, disappeared on March 8, 2014, while en route from Kuala Lumpur International Airport in Malaysia to Beijing Capital International Airport in China. The Boeing 777-200ER aircraft, carrying 227 passengers and 12 crew members, took off at 12:42 a.m. local time. The pilots communicated with Air Traffic Control, ATC, about 38 minutes after takeoff. At this point, the flight was over the South China Sea. This was the last voice contact from the cockpit. Shortly after this communication, at 1:22 a.m. local time, the aircraft vanished from ATC's secondary surveillance radar screens. Secondary radar relies on a transponder on the aircraft to broadcast its identity, altitude, and speed. When this transponder stops working or is switched off, the aircraft disappears from this type of radar. However, the story doesn't end there. The Malaysian military's primary radar system continued to track the aircraft for another hour. Primary radar works by bouncing radio waves off the aircraft's surface without needing a response from a transponder. This military radar tracked MH370 as it deviated significantly from its planned northeastern flight path. Instead, it turned sharply westward, crossing the Malay Peninsula and then the Andaman Sea. The last recorded position on military radar was at 2:22 a.m. local time, 200 nautical miles northwest of Penang Island in northwestern Peninsular Malaysia. At this point, the aircraft flew out of the range of the military radar. The fact that MH370 went incommunicado and off radar raises several critical questions. Why did the secondary radar contact cease? Was the transponder malfunctioning? Or was it intentionally disabled? The change in flight path, detected by military radar, further deepens the mystery. Why would a commercial flight, heading to Beijing, suddenly turn west and fly for another hour across a peninsula and out over the sea? The lack of any distress signals or communication about technical problems before the disappearance adds another layer of complexity. Pilots typically communicate any issues they encounter to air traffic control. The silence from MH370 suggests either a sudden and catastrophic event that prevented communication, or a deliberate decision not to communicate. Consider a scenario where a technical malfunction occurred, such as a complete electrical failure. This could explain the loss of the transponder signal, as the transponder relies on the aircraft's electrical system to function. However, a total electrical failure that simultaneously disables all communication systems and leads to a significant and controlled change in flight path seems unlikely. Modern aircraft have backup power systems for critical functions. Another scenario involves intentional action. If someone on board deliberately switched off the transponder, this would explain the disappearance from secondary radar. The subsequent change in flight path, as tracked by military radar, suggests that the aircraft was still under some form of control. This raises the possibility of hijacking or a deliberate act by the crew. For example, imagine a situation where a pilot, for reasons unknown, decided to divert the aircraft. They might switch off the transponder to avoid being tracked by civilian ATC. The military radar tracking then becomes the only record of the aircraft's movement. The westward turn and continued flight for an hour suggest a deliberate course. The investigation into MH370's disappearance became one of the largest and most expensive aviation searches in history. Initially, the search focused on the Gulf of Thailand and the South China Sea, where the last secondary radar contact occurred. However, after the analysis of satellite communication data, the search area expanded significantly to the Strait of Malacca, the Andaman Sea, and eventually the southern Indian Ocean. The satellite data analysis, particularly from Inmarsat, provided crucial information about the flight's possible trajectory after it went off radar. Although these communications did not give precise location data in the traditional sense, they allowed investigators to estimate the aircraft's distance from the satellite at various points in time. This data suggested that the flight continued for several hours after the last radar contact and eventually flew south into the remote southern Indian Ocean. The disappearance of MH370 after it went incommunicado and off radar remains a profound mystery in aviation history. The available data paints a picture of a flight that deviated from its planned course, continued flying for an extended period without communication, and ultimately disappeared in a remote part of the world. The lack of a clear explanation for these events continues to fuel speculation and ongoing debate. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, bound for Beijing from Kuala Lumpur, took off on March 8, 2014. Less than an hour into the flight, as the Boeing 777 was about to enter Vietnamese airspace, something unexpected happened. The aircraft made a sharp turn, a U-turn, back over the Malay Peninsula. This unscheduled change in direction, occurring around 1:30 a.m. local time, was detected by Malaysian military radar. Shortly after this turn, all communication with the aircraft ceased. The transponder, which relays the plane's location and altitude, went silent at 1:21 a.m. This sudden stop in communication, coupled with the observed change in course, marked the beginning of MH370's complete disappearance from radar and ultimately from the world's view. This U-turn is a critical piece of the puzzle surrounding the missing plane. It indicates the flight was no longer following its planned route. Instead of heading northeast towards Beijing, it flew west, crossing the Malay Peninsula, and then continued northwest over the Strait of Malacca. This deviation was tracked by military radar for about an hour before the signal was lost over the Andaman Sea at 2:22 a.m. The fact that this turn occurred just as the plane was transitioning between Malaysian and Vietnamese airspace has led to various interpretations. Some experts believe this timing suggests a deliberate act, possibly to avoid detection by air traffic control in either country. For instance, if a pilot wanted to conceal their actions, making a turn at the precise moment of handover between airspaces might offer a brief window of opportunity where their altered course could go unnoticed initially. Consider a scenario where a car is driving on a highway and is about to cross from one state to another. If the driver suddenly makes an unexpected U-turn right at the state line, it might take a little longer for authorities in either state to realize the car is no longer where it should be. Similarly, in aviation, the responsibility for tracking a flight shifts between air traffic control centers as the plane moves from one airspace to another. A deliberate turn at such a boundary could introduce a delay in recognizing the deviation. The U-turn itself suggests the involvement of someone with control over the aircraft. A catastrophic mechanical failure might lead to a loss of altitude or erratic movements. But a defined turn like the one observed indicates the plane was still being actively flown. This has led investigators to consider various scenarios, including pilot intervention. For example, if the pilots faced an emergency, their training would typically involve communicating with air traffic control and attempting to return to the nearest airport. The silence from the cockpit and the westward turn are inconsistent with standard emergency procedures. This has fueled speculation about a possible hijacking or a deliberate act by someone on board. Another aspect to consider is the precision of the turn. Analysis by aerospace experts using flight simulators has suggested that the U-turn was not a simple, gradual maneuver. Instead, it appeared to be a sharp, controlled turn that would likely require manual input from an experienced pilot. This level of control further supports the idea that the plane was being intentionally redirected. Imagine a bus taking a scheduled route. If the bus driver suddenly makes a sharp U-turn on a straight road, it's clear this was a conscious decision, not something that happened by accident. Similarly, the sharp U-turn of MH370 points towards a deliberate change in flight path. Following the U-turn and the subsequent loss of radar contact, the search for MH370 initially focused on the South China Sea. However, once the westward turn was confirmed, search efforts expanded to the Strait of Malacca and the Andaman Sea. Later analysis of signals between the aircraft and an Inmarsat satellite indicated the plane continued flying for several hours, heading south over the Indian Ocean. The unexplained U-turn remains a key element in understanding the sequence of events that led to MH370's disappearance. It signifies a departure from the intended flight, a loss of communication, and the beginning of a mystery that continues to baffle aviation experts and the families of those on board. The reasons behind this turn and who was responsible for it are questions that remain unanswered, underscoring the complexity and the enduring mystery of MH370. The disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, MH370, on March 8, 2014, remains one of aviation's greatest mysteries. The Boeing 777, en route from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing with 239 people on board, vanished from radar shortly after takeoff. While the initial search focused on the South China Sea, subsequent analysis of radar and satellite data revealed a startling fact. The aircraft continued to fly for approximately 7 hours after its last contact with air traffic control. This extended flight time, far beyond what was initially understood, significantly deepens the enigma surrounding MH370's fate. The planned flight duration was about 5.5 hours. The aircraft carried enough fuel for approximately 7.5 hours of flight. This extra fuel allowed for potential diversions to other airports if needed. However, the data retrieved from Inmarsat, a British satellite telecommunications company, indicated that the aircraft continued to send hourly handshake signals for several hours after it disappeared from radar. These signals, while not providing precise location data, allowed experts to determine that the plane remained airborne for a considerable period. This revelation shifted the focus of the search dramatically. Instead of a crash in the immediate vicinity of its last radar contact, the possibility emerged that the aircraft flew a significant distance, potentially in a completely different direction. Analysis of the final satellite handshakes led investigators to believe that the plane eventually ended its flight somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean, far west of Australia. This vast and remote area became the primary search zone. The fact that MH370 flew for so long raises numerous questions. Why did the plane deviate so drastically from its intended flight path? Who was in control of the aircraft during those final hours? Were the pilots incapacitated, or was the plane under the control of someone else? The extended flight time suggests a deliberate act or a series of events that allowed the aircraft to remain airborne for such a prolonged period. Consider a scenario if the pilots had become incapacitated early in the flight due to a sudden event like a loss of cabin pressure. The aircraft, flying on autopilot, could have continued on a set course until it ran out of fuel. However, the turn back over the Malay Peninsula and the subsequent westward flight suggest manual inputs to the flight controls. This implies that someone, whether it was the pilots or someone else, was actively directing the plane for a significant portion of its flight. Another aspect of the mystery is the disabling of the plane's communication systems. The Aircraft Communication, Addressing and Reporting System, ACARS, which transmits data about the aircraft's performance, sent its last transmission shortly after takeoff and then went silent. The transponder, which communicates the plane's identity and location to air traffic control radar, was also switched off. These actions suggest a deliberate attempt to make the aircraft disappear from conventional tracking systems. If the communication systems were disabled intentionally, it further supports the idea that the extended flight was not simply the result of an accident or pilot incapacitation. Someone with knowledge of the aircraft's systems would likely have been responsible for these actions. This leads to various theories, ranging from a hijacking to a deliberate act by one or both of the pilots. The 7 hours airborne also implies that the aircraft traveled a considerable distance. Based on the estimated speed of a Boeing 777, the plane could have flown thousands of miles during this time. This vast range made the initial search area incredibly large and challenging. Even with sophisticated satellite data analysis, the final estimated crash location was a massive arc in the southern Indian Ocean. The discovery of debris on the shores of islands in the western Indian Ocean, thousands of kilometers from the primary search area, confirmed that the plane did indeed end its flight in that general region. However, the exact location of the main wreckage remains unknown. The drift analysis of the debris suggested a possible crash site, but extensive underwater searches have so far yielded no conclusive results. The fact that MH370 remained airborne for 7 hours after its last communication is a crucial piece of the puzzle. It transforms the event from a sudden disappearance to a prolonged period of unknown activity. This extended duration allows for a wider range of possibilities and complicates the efforts to understand what truly happened on that fateful flight. The mystery endures, fueled by the unanswered questions surrounding those 7 hours in the air. The disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, MH370, on March 8, 2014, remains one of aviation's biggest mysteries. The Boeing 777, carrying 227 passengers and 12 crew members, vanished en route from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. The initial hours and days following its disappearance were marked by confusion and a frustrating lack of concrete evidence. One of the most perplexing aspects of the early investigation was the failure to locate any wreckage from the aircraft. The search began in the South China Sea and the Strait of Malacca, areas close to the plane's last known positions according to radar. Ships and aircraft from multiple nations, including Malaysia, Vietnam, China, and the United States, scoured these waters. They looked for any sign of the missing Boeing 777, debris floating on the surface, oil slicks, or any other indication of a crash site. Despite these extensive efforts, the initial search yielded nothing. No physical evidence of MH370 was found in the areas where it was last tracked by air traffic control and military radar. This absence of immediate wreckage baffled investigators and the public alike. In typical aviation accidents, especially those involving a large aircraft, debris fields are usually found relatively quickly. These fields provide crucial clues about the nature of the incident. The lack of any such findings in the early days of the MH370 search only deepened the mystery. It suggested several possibilities, none of them straightforward. One possibility was that the aircraft had not crashed in the initially searched areas. This would imply a significant deviation from its planned flight path, one that was not immediately apparent from the available radar data. Another possibility, more unsettling, was that the aircraft had somehow remained intact upon impact with the water, or that the debris had sunk rapidly without leaving any trace on the surface. Both scenarios were considered highly unusual for a large commercial jetliner. The failure to find wreckage in the initial search phase had a significant impact. It fueled speculation and conspiracy theories about the fate of MH370. With no physical evidence to analyze, investigators had to rely on other forms of data, such as radar information and satellite communications. This data was often complex and open to interpretation, leading to conflicting theories and prolonging the uncertainty for the families of those on board. For example, early radar data showed the aircraft deviating from its intended course, turning west across the Malay Peninsula before heading northwest. This suggested that the plane was under some form of control after its last communication with air traffic control. However, the lack of any debris in these areas raised questions about the accuracy or completeness of the radar tracking, or about what happened to the aircraft after it left radar range. The absence of wreckage also complicated the search efforts. Without a confirmed crash site, search teams had no specific area to focus on. This meant that vast stretches of ocean had to be covered, a time-consuming and resource-intensive process. The initial search area expanded significantly as investigators tried to reconcile the lack of debris with the available radar and emerging satellite data. The enigma of the missing wreckage also played heavily on the emotions of the families of the passengers and crew. The absence of any physical proof made it difficult for them to accept the possibility of a fatal accident. It kept alive a sliver of hope, however faint, that their loved ones might still be alive. This emotional turmoil was compounded by the constant media attention and the proliferation of often unsubstantiated theories. In the days and weeks following the disappearance, the search area expanded dramatically based on analysis of satellite pings received from the aircraft. These pings suggested that the plane had continued flying for several hours after losing contact, possibly along one of two vast arcs, a northern arc stretching into Central Asia and a southern arc deep into the Indian Ocean. The focus of the search eventually shifted to the southern Indian Ocean, thousands of miles from the initial search area. Despite this shift and the deployment of sophisticated underwater search equipment, the lack of initial wreckage remained a haunting aspect of the MH370 mystery. It underscored the unprecedented nature of the disappearance and the immense challenges faced by investigators in trying to understand what happened to the aircraft and the people on board. The initial failure to find debris was not just a setback for the investigation, it was a key element in the enduring enigma of MH370. It highlighted the limitations of current tracking technology and the vastness and unforgiving nature of the ocean. The disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, MH370, on March 8, 2014, remains one of aviation's biggest mysteries. The lack of concrete answers about what happened to the Boeing 777 and the 239 people on board has fueled a wide range of bizarre theories, ranging from plausible-sounding scenarios to outright outlandish claims. One early theory suggested a terrorist attack. Some people speculated that terrorists hijacked the plane as part of a larger conspiracy. For example, shortly after the disappearance, media mogul Rupert Murdoch tweeted that the incident confirms conspiracy turning to make trouble for China. He later suggested the plane might be hidden in northern Pakistan, similar to where Osama bin Laden was found. These claims, however, lacked any supporting evidence and were widely dismissed as conspiracy theories. A Russian newspaper also endorsed a similar idea, proposing that unknown terrorists hijacked the aircraft, flew it to Afghanistan, and were holding the crew and passengers hostage. Another theory, circulated on the social media platform Reddit, drew a parallel to a 1969 hijacking of a Korean Airlines YS-11 aircraft. This theory suggested that MH370 had enough fuel to be flown to North Korea. However, no credible evidence has ever emerged to support this idea. A particularly unusual theory involved a patent for semiconductor wafer fabrication, patent BUT 8671381, which was approved days after MH370 vanished. Social media posts and email chains claimed that the patent rights were split 5 ways, 20% to Freescale Semiconductor and 20% each to 4 employees, all of whom were passengers on the missing plane. This led to speculation that the disappearance was linked to the patent. However, the fact-checking website Snopes.com investigated this claim and found no evidence that the 4 inventors listed on the patent application were actually on the flight's passenger list, or that they were entitled to a 20% share. Snopes also pointed out that it is unlikely their share would automatically revert to Freescale upon their death. Adding to the mystery, some theories focused on the possibility of deliberate action by someone on board. following the discovery that the plane's course was changed via the flight management system, a computer that directs the plane along a pre-programmed route. Investigators considered the possibility of foul play involving the pilot or co-pilot. This suspicion grew when it was revealed that the plane's transponders and ASARs, aircraft communications addressing and reporting system, were deliberately switched off. The ASAR's system typically transmits data about the plane's performance and location. The deliberate disabling of these communication systems suggested a coordinated effort to make the plane disappear from radar. In the absence of wreckage for a long time, some theories ventured into even more speculative territory. One such theory involved alien abduction, though this remains firmly in the realm of science fiction. Other far-fetched ideas included the plane being shot down during a secret military operation or being part of an elaborate insurance scam. Even after debris confirmed to be from MH370 washed up on the shores of islands in the western Indian Ocean starting in July 2015, the bizarre theories did not entirely disappear. While the discovery of wreckage indicated the plane ultimately crashed, it did not explain why it deviated so drastically from its flight path, or what caused it to end up thousands of miles from its intended route. This lack of a clear narrative continued to fuel speculation and keep the mystery alive. The search for MH370 has been extensive and costly, covering vast areas of the Indian Ocean. Despite the efforts of numerous international teams and the use of advanced technology, the main body of the aircraft has never been found. This ongoing lack of a definitive crash site only serves to further encourage the proliferation of unconventional explanations for the plane's disappearance. The human desire for answers, coupled with the unusual circumstances of MH370's vanishing, has created a fertile ground for even the most outlandish theories to take root and circulate. Percy Fawcett, a British artillery officer, archaeologist and explorer, embarked on a relentless quest into the heart of the Amazon rainforest. His goal was to find a fabled ancient city he called Z. This wasn't a casual exploration. Fawcett was driven by a conviction that a sophisticated civilization once thrived in this largely uncharted territory. Fawcett's belief wasn't based on mere fantasy. He had studied historical accounts and local legends that hinted at the existence of such a place. One key piece of evidence was an old Portuguese manuscript, known as Manuscript 512, housed in Brazil's National Library. This document, supposedly written in 1753, detailed a Portuguese explorer's discovery of extensive ruins deep within the jungle. The manuscript described arches, a statue, and a temple adorned with hieroglyphs. Although the exact location remained a mystery, this account fueled Fawcett's determination. Before his final, ill-fated expedition, Fawcett had already made several journeys into the Amazon. These earlier explorations, often fraught with peril, further solidified his conviction about the lost city. He reported encountering unusual phenomena and hearing consistent stories from indigenous tribes that spoke of ancient settlements swallowed by the jungle. These experiences, combined with the historical texts, led him to believe that a significant civilization, perhaps even more advanced than previously imagined, lay hidden within the Amazon's dense foliage. In April 1925, Fawcett set out on what would be his final attempt to locate Z. He was accompanied by his eldest son, Jack, and one of Jack's friends, Raleigh Rimmel. Despite the inherent dangers of venturing into unexplored Amazonian territory, Fawcett was optimistic. He meticulously planned the expedition, although he deliberately kept the exact route secret, perhaps to prevent others from claiming his discovery. The last communication from the Fawcett expedition came on May 29, 1925. In a letter to his wife, delivered by a native runner, Fawcett indicated that he and his companions were about to venture into truly uncharted lands beyond the upper Xingu River. After this, they vanished without a trace. The disappearance of Percy Fawcett and his team sparked widespread speculation and numerous attempts to discover their fate. Some believe they succumbed to the harsh realities of the jungle, disease, starvation, or attacks by wild animals. Others theorize they might have encountered hostile indigenous tribes. There were even more outlandish suggestions, ranging from Fawcett starting his own isolated community to being captured by a lost tribe. One theory that emerged years later, supported by some accounts from indigenous people, suggested that Fawcett and his son were killed by a local tribe after a disagreement. However, concrete evidence to definitively prove this, or any other theory, has never been found. The mystery surrounding Percy Fawcett's disappearance continues to captivate the public imagination. His unwavering belief in a lost city and his dramatic vanishing act have turned him into a legendary figure. The story serves as a potent reminder of the allure and the dangers of exploration into the unknown corners of the world. Even today, the vastness and impenetrability of the Amazon hold secrets, and the fate of Percy Fawcett and the lost city he sought remain among them. The region where Percy Fawcett disappeared was an unexplored jungle, a dangerous environment filled with threats that could easily overwhelm even an experienced explorer. This was not a tame wilderness. It was a raw, untamed expanse where nature held absolute power and the unprepared faced dire consequences. One of the most immediate dangers was the sheer density of the jungle itself. Imagine a place where sunlight barely touches the ground, where a thick canopy of leaves blocks the sky, creating a perpetual twilight. The undergrowth is a tangled mess of vines, thorny bushes, and fallen trees, forming natural barriers that slow progress to a crawl. Every step requires effort. Every mile is a victory hard won. This dense vegetation makes navigation incredibly difficult. Without established trails or clear landmarks, it is easy to become disoriented and lost in a green maze that looks the same in every direction. For someone unfamiliar with jungle travel, this disorientation can quickly lead to panic and exhaustion. Adding to the navigational challenges are the waterways. While rivers can seem like natural paths through the jungle, they present their own set of dangers. Strong currents can capsize small boats, and unexpected rapids can smash them against rocks. The riverbanks themselves can be treacherous, with steep drops and unstable footing. Furthermore, these waters are often home to dangerous creatures. Caiman, large reptiles similar to alligators, lurk beneath the murky surface, ready to strike at anything that comes within reach. Piranhas, with their razor-sharp teeth and aggressive nature, can strip flesh from bone in a matter of minutes. Electric eels pose a hidden threat, capable of delivering powerful shocks that can stun or even kill. Beyond the physical obstacles and large predators, the jungle teems with smaller but equally dangerous life. Insects are everywhere, and many carry diseases. Mosquitoes transmit malaria, yellow fever, and dengue fever, debilitating illnesses that can be fatal, especially without modern medical treatment. Various flies can cause painful bites and transmit other infections. Then there are the stinging and biting insects like ants and wasps, some of which deliver venomous stings that can cause severe allergic reactions. The jungle floor and the trees above are also home to numerous venomous creatures. Snakes including pit vipers and coral snakes lie camouflaged amongst the leaves and branches, their bites capable of causing paralysis or death. Spiders, some as large as dinner plates and possessing potent venom, hide in dark crevices. Even seemingly harmless creatures like certain frogs and caterpillars can secrete toxins that can cause severe skin irritation or worse upon contact. Disease is a constant threat in such a humid and biologically diverse environment. Bacteria and fungi thrive in the warm, wet conditions, and even minor cuts and scrapes can quickly become infected. Without proper hygiene and medical supplies, these infections can spread rapidly and become life-threatening. The explorers of Fawcett's time had limited knowledge of tropical diseases and even more limited means of treating them. Finally, the unpredictable nature of the jungle itself posed a significant risk. Sudden and torrential downpours can turn dry trails into muddy quagmires and cause rivers to flood rapidly. The dense canopy traps humidity, leading to heat stroke and dehydration, especially during strenuous physical activity. Food and water sources can be scarce and difficult to find, requiring extensive knowledge of edible plants and hunting techniques. Without these skills, starvation and dehydration become very real possibilities. The unexplored jungle was not just a beautiful, untouched wilderness. It was a formidable adversary, a place where survival depended on constant vigilance, expert knowledge, and a significant amount of luck. Percy Fawcett, a British artillery officer turned explorer, became consumed by the idea of a lost city he called Z. This obsession ultimately led to his mysterious disappearance in the Amazon rainforest. Fawcett's fascination with a hidden civilization began during his expeditions to map the border between Brazil and Bolivia in the early 1900s. Local tribes spoke of ancient ruins deep within the jungle. These tales, combined with Fawcett's discovery of an old document, manuscript 512, fueled his belief in a sophisticated society that once thrived in the Amazon. The manuscript, written in the 18th century, described the remnants of a large ancient city with stone buildings, wide roads, and hieroglyphs. Unlike many of his contemporaries who viewed the indigenous people as primitive, Fawcett believed they were descendants of a more advanced culture. He theorized that a significant city, Z, lay hidden in the Mato Grosso region of Brazil, holding secrets about a pre-Hispanic civilization. He envisioned Z as a crucial historical discovery, one that would rewrite the understanding of South American history. World War I temporarily halted Fawcett's pursuit, but his desire to find Z never waned. After the war, he embarked on personal expeditions. In 1925, despite warnings of the dangers, the 57-year-old Fawcett, along with his 21-year-old son Jack and Jack's friend Raleigh Rimmel, ventured into the uncharted territory of the Amazon. Fawcett was determined to prove his theory about Z. He took minimal supplies and dismissed his local guides as they entered the most perilous part of their journey. The last communication from Fawcett was a letter to his wife Nina, dated May 29, 1925. He wrote optimistically of entering unexplored territory with his two companions. After that, they vanished without a trace. The disappearance of Fawcett and his party sparked numerous rescue expeditions, but none yielded any definitive answers. Some believed hostile tribes killed them. Others speculated they succumbed to the harsh jungle environment, succumbing to disease, starvation, or accidents. A few even proposed Fawcett intentionally disappeared to live a new life in the Amazon or establish a spiritual commune. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, the legend of Fawcett and his lost city Z persisted. His unwavering belief in a lost civilization, fueled by his discovery of ancient artifacts and the old manuscript, became his all-consuming obsession. This very obsession, the drive to uncover a secret city hidden deep within the Amazon, ultimately led to his fateful and unexplained disappearance, cementing Z as the enigmatic goal that cost him his life. The small size of his team made his disappearance more mysterious. When only a few people are on an expedition, the absence of one person becomes immediately noticeable. It's like having a small group of friends on a camping trip. If one friend suddenly isn't around, everyone will realize it quickly and start asking questions. However, if there's a large group, someone might be missing for a while before anyone notices. Think about a scientific research team in the field. If the team has only 3 members and one doesn't return to the base camp, the other 2 will know right away that something is wrong. They will likely start searching and alerting others. But if the team consists of 20 people, one person could get separated, and it might take longer for the others to realize they are missing, especially if they were working in different areas. The term solo expedition implies that he was traveling alone. If this is the case, the mystery deepens even further. When a person disappears while on their own, there are no immediate witnesses or other team members to provide information about what might have happened. It's like someone going for a hike in a remote area and not coming back. There's no one else who saw what direction they went or what challenges they might have faced. Consider a mountaineer attempting a solo climb of a difficult peak. If they don't return as planned, there's no one who can say for sure what went wrong. Did they fall? Were they caught in a storm? Did they take a wrong turn? The lack of other team members means there's no one to offer clues or a first-hand account of the events leading up to the disappearance. In contrast, imagine a well-documented expedition with a large support staff. If someone goes missing, there are likely others who saw them last, know their plans, and can provide details that might help in a search. For example, in a large-scale archaeological dig, if a worker doesn't show up, their colleagues can say where they were last seen working and who they were with. The small team size, especially if it was a solo endeavor, eliminates these immediate sources of information. It creates a vacuum of knowledge about the disappearance. This lack of information can lead to more speculation and makes it harder to determine the cause of the disappearance, thus increasing the mystery surrounding it. The fewer people involved, the fewer potential leads there are to follow. It's like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. The smaller the initial picture, the harder it is to guess what those missing pieces might show. Radio silence, in the context of Percy Fawcett's final expedition, signifies a complete stop in communication from him and his team after they ventured into the uncharted territory of the Amazon jungle. Fawcett, a seasoned British explorer, along with his son Jack and Jack's friend Raleigh Rimmel, embarked on a quest in 1925 to find what he called the lost city of Z. This mythical city, he believed, lay hidden deep within the Mato Grosso region of Brazil. Before entering the dense foliage, Fawcett had maintained contact with the outside world. He sent letters and dispatches detailing their progress, the challenges they faced, and his unwavering belief in the existence of this lost civilization. These communications painted a picture of a determined explorer pushing into the unknown, fueled by historical accounts and his own conviction. The last message from Fawcett was dated May 29, 1925. In this communication, he informed his wife, Nina, that they were about to enter unexplored territory and anticipated being out of contact for an extended period, possibly a year or two, if they survived the journey. This message marked the definitive end of any news from the expedition. The lack of subsequent communication was not entirely unexpected initially. Fawcett had cautioned that the nature of their exploration, venturing into regions with no established trails or communication networks, meant periods of silence were likely. The dense jungle, with its natural barriers and the absence of any modern means of contact like radio, would naturally isolate them. However, as months turned into a year, and then two without any word, a growing sense of unease and then alarm spread. The radio silence became a stark indicator that something had gone terribly wrong. In the 1920s, while radio technology existed, it was not the portable and reliable means of communication we know today, especially for deep jungle expeditions. Fawcett's team did not have the means to maintain regular contact once they moved beyond established settlements. The implications of this radio silence were profound. It meant that the world had no way of knowing the fate of Fawcett and his companions. Were they successful in finding their lost city? Had they encountered hostile indigenous tribes? Had they succumbed to the harsh realities of the Amazon, such as disease, starvation, or encounters with dangerous wildlife? The silence provided no answers, only fueling speculation and solidifying the mystery surrounding their disappearance. The complete lack of any signal or message underscored the isolation and the inherent risks of such an ambitious undertaking. It highlighted the vastness and unforgiving nature of the Amazon rainforest, a place where a small expedition could vanish without a trace. The radio silence, therefore, is not just an absence of communication, it is a powerful symbol of the unknown that swallowed Fawcett and his team, transforming their hopeful adventure into one of history's most enduring mysteries. The silence itself became a key piece of the puzzle, a constant reminder of the unanswered questions surrounding their fate in the green depths of the jungle. Percy Fawcett, a British explorer, vanished in the Amazon rainforest in 1925 while searching for a lost city he called Zed. One theory about his disappearance suggests that indigenous tribes killed him and his companions, his son Jack and Raleigh Rimmel. This theory arises from the dangers inherent in exploring uncharted territories, inhabited by isolated groups. The Amazon is home to numerous indigenous tribes, some of whom have little to no contact with the outside world. These tribes often have their own customs, territories, and ways of life, which they may fiercely protect from outsiders. Encounters with explorers can be seen as intrusions, leading to hostile reactions. Several historical accounts and oral traditions from indigenous tribes hint at the possibility of Fawcett and his team meeting a violent end at their hands. Some stories suggest that the explorers may have unknowingly violated tribal customs or entered forbidden territory, leading to conflict. For instance, one account mentions that Fawcett's party was warned not to proceed eastward into the land of a fierce tribe. When they did not return, the Kalapalo tribe, who relayed this warning, concluded they were killed. Another version suggests that the explorers' behavior offended a local tribe. This account details instances such as one of Fawcett's companions urinating in the river upstream from where the tribe drew drinking water, shooting an animal and improperly handling the meat in the village, and striking a child. These actions could have been seen as severe disrespect, potentially leading to a fatal response from the tribe. Furthermore, Fawcett's expedition was relatively small, consisting of only 3 men. This small number would have made them vulnerable if they encountered a hostile group. They also reportedly carried few gifts, which were often essential for establishing peaceful relations with indigenous tribes. The lack of such gifts could have been interpreted negatively. It is important to note that while the killed by indigenous tribes theory is plausible, it remains one of several possibilities surrounding Fawcett's disappearance. Other theories include death by natural causes such as disease, starvation, or accidents in the harsh jungle environment. The dense and unforgiving nature of the Amazon rainforest presents numerous dangers to even the most experienced explorers. The mystery of Percy Fawcett's fate continues to fascinate researchers and adventurers. The possibility of an encounter with hostile indigenous tribes serves as a stark reminder of the risks involved in exploring remote and uncontacted regions of the world. The Amazon, with its hidden communities and ancient ways, holds many secrets, and the disappearance of Fawcett and his party remains one of its most enduring enigmas. The unforgiving environment of a jungle presents numerous challenges to survival. Dense vegetation restricts movement and visibility, making it easy to get lost. Navigating without proper tools or skills can lead to disorientation and exhaustion. The thick canopy often blocks sunlight, making it difficult to determine direction using the sun. Furthermore, the uneven terrain, with obstacles like fallen logs and tangled undergrowth, increases the risk of injuries such as sprains and cuts. Water is essential for survival, but finding a clean and reliable source in the jungle can be difficult. Rivers and streams may appear plentiful, but they can harbor harmful bacteria, parasites, and dangerous wildlife. Without the means to purify water through boiling or filtration, drinking it can lead to severe illness and dehydration. Stagnant pools of water should be avoided altogether, as they are breeding grounds for disease-carrying organisms. Food procurement in the jungle is another significant hurdle. While the environment may seem abundant in plant and animal life, identifying safe and nutritious sources requires extensive knowledge. Many jungle plants are poisonous, and consuming them can lead to severe health problems or even death. Hunting animals can be challenging and time-consuming, demanding specific skills and tools. Without adequate food supplies or the ability to forage and hunt effectively, starvation becomes a real threat. The tropical climate of many jungles adds another layer of difficulty. High temperatures and humidity lead to rapid dehydration and heat stroke. Heavy rainfall is common and can cause flash floods, making river crossings dangerous and potentially washing away supplies. Damp conditions also promote the growth of fungi and bacteria, increasing the risk of infections from even minor injuries. Insects and other creatures pose constant threats. Mosquitoes, for example, can transmit diseases like malaria, dengue fever, and yellow fever. Various biting insects can cause painful and itchy welts, leading to secondary infections if scratched. Venomous snakes and spiders lurk in hidden places, and encounters can be fatal. Larger predators, such as jaguars or big cats, may also pose a risk, although attacks on humans are relatively rare. Percy Fawcett, a seasoned explorer, ventured into the Amazon jungle in 1925 with his son and another companion in search of a lost city. Despite his experience, the harsh realities of the jungle environment could have overwhelmed his expedition. If they became lost, their ability to find food and clean water would have been severely compromised. Injuries sustained while navigating the difficult terrain could have incapacitated them. The constant threat of tropical diseases and venomous creatures would have further diminished their chances of survival. Without sufficient supplies and the ability to replenish them, starvation, dehydration, or disease could have ultimately led to their demise. The jungle, while seemingly lush, presents a relentless and unforgiving challenge to those unprepared or unlucky enough to face its dangers without adequate resources and resilience. The disappearance of Percy Fawcett in 1925, while searching for a lost city he called Zerd in the Amazon rainforest, fuels a captivating and romantic idea. This notion suggests that Fawcett, a seasoned British explorer, might have actually found his elusive city and chosen to remain there, either by his own will or due to unforeseen circumstances within this hidden civilization. Fawcett's quest for Zed stemmed from his belief in a once great civilization that thrived in the Amazon. He based this theory on historical accounts, indigenous tales, and his own discoveries during earlier expeditions. He envisioned Z as a sophisticated urban center, possibly the last remnant of a more widespread ancient culture. This idea of a lost world untouched by modern times and holding untold secrets is inherently romantic. Several aspects of Fawcett's story contribute to this enduring romantic notion. Firstly, his character as a daring and determined explorer venturing into the unknown in pursuit of a grand vision fits the archetype of a romantic hero. He was driven by a sense of adventure and a conviction that went against the prevailing scientific beliefs of his time, which often dismissed the possibility of complex Amazonian civilizations. Secondly, the mystery surrounding his disappearance only deepens the romanticism. Because Fawcett, his son Jack, and their companion Raleigh Rymel vanished without a trace, numerous theories have emerged, each adding a layer of intrigue. While some speculate about death by hostile tribes, disease, or accident, the idea that they integrated into a hidden society or discovered a secret paradise holds a particular allure. Imagine a scenario where Fawcett and his team stumbled upon a thriving, isolated community, the descendants of the civilization he sought. Perhaps they were welcomed due to Fawcett's knowledge or perceived respect for their history. In this romantic vision, Fawcett might have found a sense of belonging or purpose within this lost world, choosing to stay and become a part of their society. Alternatively, the hidden city itself could be imagined in a romantic light. Instead of just ruins, perhaps it was a living city, shielded from the outside world by natural barriers or the deliberate actions of its inhabitants. Fawcett, upon finding it, might have been so captivated by its beauty, its unique culture, or its advanced knowledge that he felt compelled to stay and document or even protect it. Consider the possibility that the city possessed technologies or understanding far beyond the Western world of the 1920s. Fawcett, a man of intellect and curiosity, might have been drawn into learning these secrets, making the prospect of returning to his former life unappealing. This paints a picture of an explorer who found not just a city, but a new world of possibilities. The lack of definitive evidence about Fawcett's fate allows these romantic notions to persist. Without concrete proof of his demise or the failure of his quest, the imagination can wander and create scenarios where he achieved his goal in a way that defied conventional expectations. The jungle, with its vastness and unexplored depths, becomes a perfect backdrop for such a hidden world. It is important to acknowledge that more practical and less romantic explanations for Fawcett's disappearance exist. However, the enduring appeal of the found the hidden city theory lies in its sense of wonder and the idea that there are still undiscovered realms and possibilities within our world. It speaks to our desire for mystery, for the existence of lost worlds, and for the triumph of individual ambition in the face of the unknown. The romantic notion of Fawcett finding his hidden city continues to capture the imagination, turning his ill-fated expedition into a legend of discovery, even without concrete proof. The quest for the lost city of Z and the disappearance of Colonel Percy Fawcett in the Amazon rainforest spawned numerous search expeditions. This dangerous area, where many vanished while looking for Fawcett, earned a sinister nickname, the Bermuda Triangle of the Jungle. The dense, uncharted terrain, coupled with disease, hostile indigenous tribes, and the sheer difficulty of jungle survival, created a perilous environment for those who dared to venture into it. One of the earliest and most significant search efforts was led by George Miller Diott of the Royal Geographical Society in 1928. Diott's expedition, like Fawcett's, aimed to penetrate the Mato Grosso region of Brazil. Despite facing immense logistical challenges and the inherent dangers of the jungle, Diott's team spent months exploring the area. While they found no trace of Fawcett or his companions, his report concluded that the explorer and his party had likely perished. This pronouncement, however, did not deter others from trying their luck. In the decades that followed, a steady stream of adventurers and hopeful rescuers entered the Bermuda Triangle of the Jungle. Many of these expeditions were ill-prepared for the harsh realities of the Amazon. They underestimated the prevalence of tropical diseases such as malaria and yellow fever, the dangers of encounters with jaguars and venomous snakes, and the difficulties of navigating the dense foliage and treacherous rivers. As a result, many searchers succumbed to the very perils that may have befallen Fawcett. Stories began to circulate of entire search parties vanishing without a trace. Some were rumored to have been killed by indigenous tribes fiercely protective of their territory. Others were believed to have been lost to the unforgiving jungle, their remains never to be found. The lack of concrete information only fueled the mystery surrounding Fawcett's disappearance and the dangers of the area. A particularly dramatic example occurred in 1996 when a well-funded expedition led by a wealthy businessman, James Lynch, ventured into the region. Lynch and his team hoped to finally solve the riddle of Fawcett's fate. However, they encountered a hostile indigenous tribe who captured them and held them for ransom. Only after paying a substantial sum in equipment did the team secure their release, a stark reminder of the ever-present dangers within this Bermuda Triangle. The allure of solving the Fawcett mystery, and perhaps even finding the lost city of Z, proved irresistible to some, despite the clear risks. The area became synonymous with disappearances, a place where the jungle seemed to swallow people whole. The active voice of danger resonated through the tales of those who entered and were never seen again. The jargon of exploration, uncharted territory, indigenous contact, logistical nightmares, became intertwined with the grim reality of loss. Imagine a scenario where a search party, confident in their modern equipment, enters the dense undergrowth, only to be overwhelmed by the oppressive heat and humidity, the relentless insects, and the disorienting sameness of the jungle. They lose their way, their supplies dwindle, and the once familiar sounds of the forest turn menacing. This was the fate, or a version of it, that many who searched for Fawcett likely faced. The Bermuda Triangle of the Jungle remained a dangerous enigma, a testament to the power and peril of the unexplored Amazon. Glenn Miller, a very well-known musician, disappeared when his plane went missing over the English Channel during World War II. This event remains a significant mystery. Miller, a major in the US Army Air Forces, was on his way from the United Kingdom to Paris, France. The date was December 15, 1944. His mission was to make arrangements for his band to entertain the Allied troops in the newly liberated city. Miller's plane was a single-engine Nordine Norseman. Two other men were on board, Lieutenant Colonel Norman Basel and the pilot, Flight Officer John Morgan. The weather that day was poor. Heavy fog and icy conditions were present over the channel. These conditions made flying very dangerous. The plane took off from RAF Twinwood Farm in Clapham, Bedfordshire. It was headed for Villa Coublay Airfield, near Paris. The flight was expected to take about an hour and a half. However, the plane never arrived. No wreckage was ever found. no bodies were ever recovered. Many theories have tried to explain what happened to Glenn Miller and his plane. One common theory suggests that the plane experienced mechanical problems due to the severe weather. Ice could have formed on the wings, making it difficult to control the aircraft. Engine failure is another possibility given the conditions. Another theory involves friendly fire. On the same day Miller's plane disappeared, the Royal Air Force, RAF, was bombing German positions in the English Channel. Some people speculate that Miller's small plane might have been accidentally hit by bombs dropped by the RAF. However, there is no concrete evidence to support this. Records from the bombing runs do not clearly indicate any accidental hits on Allied aircraft. A more controversial theory suggests that Miller might have been involved in espionage or some secret mission. This theory often includes rumors of Miller having sensitive information or being involved with intelligence operations. However, again, there is no reliable evidence to back up these claims. Official investigations have found no indication of Miller being involved in anything other than his musical duties for the army. The most likely explanation remains that the small, single-engine plane was overwhelmed by the harsh weather conditions. The combination of heavy fog, icing, and possibly strong winds could have led to a crash. The English Channel is known for its strong currents and deep waters, which could explain why no trace of the plane or its occupants was ever found. Consider a scenario. Imagine a small boat trying to navigate through a very dense fog. The captain cannot see where they are going. Suddenly, strong winds and large waves start to rock the boat violently. The boat could easily capsize and disappear without a trace, especially if it was far from any shipping lanes. Similarly, Miller's small plane flying in severe weather over a large body of water like the English Channel faced similar dangers. The lack of any wreckage is not entirely unusual in such circumstances. Small aircraft can break apart upon impact with water, and the debris can be scattered over a large area by currents. The depth of the channel in some parts would also make recovery efforts extremely difficult, even with today's technology. In 1944, search capabilities were far more limited. The official investigation by the US Army concluded that Miller's plane most likely crashed due to the adverse weather conditions. While this explanation might seem simple, it aligns with the known facts and the dangers of flying small aircraft in such conditions during wartime. The mystery surrounding Glenn Miller's disappearance continues to fascinate people, but the most plausible explanation points to a tragic accident caused by bad weather. The English Channel marks the area where the aircraft carrying the legendary American bandleader Glenn Miller disappeared during World War II. On December 15, 1944, Miller boarded a single-engine UC-64 Norseman aircraft at RAF Twinwood Farm in Bedfordshire, England. His destination was Paris, France, where he was scheduled to make arrangements for his Army Air Forces band to perform for the Allied troops who had recently liberated the city. Accompanying Miller on this ill-fated flight were Lieutenant Colonel Norman Basel and the pilot, Flight Officer John Morgan. The plane took off around 2 p.m. in heavy fog. Military observers tracked the aircraft heading south over Beachy Head, a prominent white chalk headland in East Sussex, England, overlooking the English Channel. However, the Norseman never reached its intended destination in France. The disappearance of Glenn Miller, a major in the US Army Air Forces and a celebrated musician, sent shockwaves across the world. His music, characterized by its distinct swing style, was immensely popular during the 1930s and 1940s, with hits like In the Mood and Chattanooga Choo Choo becoming anthems of the era. Miller had volunteered for military service in 1942, aiming to boost the morale of American troops through his music. In the days following the disappearance, as Miller failed to arrive in Paris, concern grew. It took some time for his absence to be officially noted, partly because he had made the travel arrangements somewhat informally, accepting a ride on the Norseman without it being part of his official orders. By Christmas Eve of 1944, the news of his disappearance became public. The United States Army Air Forces launched an investigation into the incident. On January 20th, 1945, they issued a classified report concluding that the C-64 likely went down over the English Channel due to a combination of factors. The report suggested that pilot disorientation, possibly exacerbated by icing conditions, leading to carburetor heater failure, were the probable causes. The weather on that December day was reportedly poor, with heavy fog and freezing temperatures, conditions known to cause icing on aircraft. Adding to the mystery was the fact that no wreckage of the plane or the bodies of Miller, Basel, or Morgan were ever recovered from the English Channel. This absence of physical evidence fueled numerous theories and speculations about what might have happened to the aircraft and its occupants. One theory that gained traction some years later involved friendly fire. A former Royal Air Force navigator claimed that on the same afternoon, returning Lancaster bombers from an aborted mission to Germany jettisoned their unused bombs over the English Channel, and one of these bombs might have struck Miller's small plane. However, this theory has been largely discredited by researchers who point to discrepancies in the timing and location of the bomb jettisons and the flight path of Miller's aircraft. Official records of the RAF Bomber Squadron and the American Army Air Forces do not support the timeline required for this scenario to be plausible. Another set of theories, less substantiated, suggested more clandestine reasons for Miller's disappearance. These ranged from him being involved in espionage and being assassinated by the Gestapo, to dying in a Paris brothel with the plane crash being a cover-up. Some even speculated that he faked his own death. However, these theories lack credible evidence and are generally considered to be products of wartime intrigue and the enduring mystery surrounding his fate. More recent analysis tends to support the original conclusion of the Army Air Force's investigation, that a combination of adverse weather conditions, potential mechanical issues with the single-engine aircraft, specifically carburetor icing, a known issue with the Norseman model, and possible pilot error led to the plane crashing into the English Channel. Given the lightweight construction of the aircraft, it likely disintegrated upon impact, and the strong currents of the channel would have quickly dispersed any debris. The English Channel, a busy waterway even during wartime, became the final resting place of a musical icon. Despite the lack of definitive answers and the persistence of various theories, the most plausible explanation remains a tragic accident caused by the perilous conditions of wartime air travel over a challenging body of water. The mystery surrounding Glenn Miller's disappearance over the English Channel continues to fascinate, but the weight of evidence points towards a fatal crash due to weather and mechanical factors. The absence of any sign of wreckage made the disappearance of Miller even more puzzling. Think about an airplane that vanishes. Usually, after a crash, there are pieces of the plane scattered over an area. People find broken parts, seats, or metal. This debris helps investigators understand what happened. It gives them clues about the impact and the forces involved. But in Miller's case, there was nothing. No broken pieces, no personal belongings, no anything that showed he was ever there. Imagine a car driving down a road and then simply not being there anymore. There are no skid marks on the road, no broken glass, no parts of the car on the side. It is as if the car just ceased to exist. This is similar to what happened with Miller. The lack of any physical evidence made it hard for people to figure out what could have occurred. When something disappears without a trace, it opens up many possibilities. Did Miller leave on his own? If so, why did he not take anything with him? Or why did no one see him go? Was there an accident where everything was completely destroyed or taken away? This seems unlikely because accidents usually leave some kind of mark. Was someone involved in his disappearance? If so, how could they have removed all evidence so completely? The police and other investigators likely looked very carefully for any sign. They probably searched the area where Miller was last seen. They might have used special tools to look for things that are not easily visible. They could have even used dogs trained to find specific scents. But if nothing was found, it means either there was truly nothing there, or whoever was responsible was very skilled at hiding things. This lack of wreckage is unusual in most disappearance cases. Even if someone tries to hide evidence, it is very hard to remove absolutely everything. Small things often get left behind. The fact that there was no debris at all suggests a few possibilities, none of which are simple. One possibility is that Miller left the area intentionally, and someone else helped to cover his tracks completely. This would mean careful planning and execution. Another possibility is a highly unusual accident where everything was contained or removed by natural forces, though this is hard to imagine. A third possibility, and perhaps the most unsettling, is that someone or something caused Miller to disappear and took great care to leave no evidence behind. The absence of wreckage made the job of the investigators much harder. Without physical clues, they had to rely on other things, like witness statements or any digital records. But even these can be limited or misleading. The mystery surrounding Miller's disappearance grew stronger because there were no pieces of the puzzle to start with. It was like trying to solve a riddle with no clues given. The empty space where evidence should have been only deepened the questions and made finding answers seem almost impossible. The secret agent theory offers one speculative explanation for the mysterious disappearance of Miller during World War II. This theory suggests that Miller was not simply a musician entertaining the troops, but also a secret agent working for the Allied forces. Proponents of this idea point to several aspects of Miller's wartime activities and his disappearance as potential evidence. One argument in favor of the secret agent theory is the nature of Miller's broadcasts. While ostensibly for entertainment, some of his radio programs included propaganda elements, and Miller himself occasionally spoke in German. This has led some to speculate that these broadcasts were a cover for clandestine communications or attempts to influence enemy morale as part of a larger intelligence operation. Imagine a scenario where coded messages were subtly embedded within musical arrangements or spoken segments, unnoticed by the general listening audience, but understood by specific individuals. Another point often raised is the unusual circumstances surrounding Miller's final flight. He was travelling in a single-engine UC-64 Norseman aircraft over the English Channel in December 1944, a time of poor weather conditions. The official explanation points to pilot error or mechanical failure due to icing as the cause of the plane's disappearance. However, those who subscribe to the secret agent theory suggest that this explanation is too simplistic and might conceal a more complex truth. Perhaps Miller was on a sensitive mission, the details of which remain classified. Consider a situation where Miller was tasked with delivering crucial information or meeting with a contact in occupied Europe. Such a mission would necessitate secrecy and might explain why a high-profile figure like Miller would undertake a seemingly risky flight in a less-than-ideal aircraft. The lack of any wreckage or remains further fuels speculation. If the plane was deliberately targeted, or if Miller was extracted after a successful mission, it could explain the absence of physical evidence. Some versions of the secret agent theory go even further, suggesting that Miller's mission involved attempts to contact or negotiate with elements within the German military, who were looking for a way to end the war. In this scenario, his disappearance could be attributed to betrayal, capture, or even assassination by hostile forces who opposed such negotiations. One account even suggests Miller was carrying a message from General Eisenhower to German generals. It is important to note that while these scenarios are intriguing, they lack concrete evidence. The official explanations regarding the plane crash remain the most plausible based on available information about the weather conditions, the aircraft, and the pilot's experience. The secret agent theory relies heavily on speculation and circumstantial details, filling in the gaps of the unknown with possibilities that fit a narrative of espionage and intrigue. For example, the propaganda element in Miller's broadcasts could simply be part of his role in the war effort to support the troops and undermine the enemy through morale-boosting entertainment and psychological warfare, a common practice during wartime. His decision to fly in the Norseman could have been due to a desire to reach Paris quickly to prepare for upcoming performances, especially given weather-related delays of other transport options. The enduring mystery of Miller's disappearance naturally invites alternative explanations. The secret agent theory, with its elements of covert operations and wartime secrets, provides a compelling narrative that moves beyond a simple aviation accident. However, without verifiable evidence, it remains in the realm of speculation, a what-if scenario that adds another layer to the enigma surrounding the famous bandleader's fate. Barbara Newhall Follett, a young and promising author, disappeared on December 7, 1939, at the age of 25. This happened after she had an argument with her husband. Follett was a remarkable talent. Her first novel, The House Without Windows, came out in January 1927 when she was only 12 years old. 2 years later, her second novel, The Voyage of the Normandy, also received positive reviews. However, her dream of a successful writing career faced difficulties. Her third novel, Lost Island, was not published during her lifetime. In 1934, Barbara married Nickerson Rogers. Initially, they seemed happy, even traveling through Europe together, but their relationship later became strained. Reports suggest that Nick wanted Barbara to focus on earning money rather than her creative writing. This caused tension in their marriage. The evening of her disappearance, Barbara reportedly left their apartment in Brookline, Massachusetts, after a disagreement. She took $30 and a notebook with her. Her husband did not report her missing to the police for 2 weeks. He said he thought she would return on her own. 4 months later, he requested a missing person bulletin. However, he used her married name, Rogers, which meant the media did not immediately recognize it was the well-known author. Barbara's mother, Helen, grew suspicious when she noticed Nick's lack of effort in finding his wife. In 1952, 13 years after Barbara vanished, Helen urged the police to investigate more thoroughly. In 1966, the mystery gained public attention with the publication of Barbara, a collection of Barbara's writings put together by Harold Greer, McCurdy with help from Helen. Despite the passage of time, Barbara Follett's disappearance remains unsolved. No body was ever found, and law enforcement found no clear evidence of what happened. In 2019, a writer named Daniel Mills proposed a theory. After looking into several missing person cases, he suggested that Barbara Follett's body might have been found in November 1948, but was wrongly identified as Elsie Whittemore, who had been missing since June 1936. Mills pointed out that the body was discovered near a farmhouse in Holderness, New Hampshire, where Barbara and Nick had rented. Some items found with the body seemed to match Barbara's belongings. The local police at the time were not aware of Barbara's disappearance. The cause of death was believed to be suicide because a bottle with traces of barbiturates was found, and Barbara was known to have used this type of medication. The details surrounding Barbara Newhall Follett's disappearance continue to be a subject of interest and speculation. The combination of her early literary success and her unexplained vanishing has made her story a haunting mystery.